Chapter 1. There is a smell that lives inside old power. It is not perfume. It is not incense. It is wet stone and pine smoke and the particular musk of creatures who have never fully learned to be afraid of anything. It coats the back of your throat before you cross the threshold. It tells your body, in a language older than words, that you are small here, that you have always been small here. Seraphine knows this smell. She breathes it in slowly through her nose as the iron doors groan open ahead of her, and she makes a private, deliberate decision. She will not let it touch her. The great hall of the ironmoor citadel stretches out before her like the open mouth of something enormous and patient. Torchlight bleeds amber across the walls carved from a single face of black mountain granite, as though the citadel was not built but excavated, hollowed out from the belly of the earth by something with very large hands. On both sides of the central aisle, the ironmoor pack stands in formation. They are not in animal form. They don't need to be. There are perhaps 200 of them, warriors, elders, sentinels, and not one of them makes a sound. Their eyes glow. Not metaphorically, not poetically. They glow, burning with a low amber luminescence that catches the torchlight and throws it back warmer, wilder, wrong in the way that beautiful things can sometimes be deeply wrong. Seraphine walks. She has been told how to do this. Her mother, in the last hour before the convoy left, had pressed cold hands against her face and said, "Walk like you are going somewhere you chose. Never let them see the door behind you." Her mother had been crying when she said it. Seraphine had not. She is 19 years old. She is dressed in the pale grey ceremonial robes of the Ashveil lowlands, the color of river fog, the color of surrender, and her dark hair has been braided tight to her skull in the formal style that says I was prepared for this. She carries nothing. The convoy had taken everything else. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a platform of stepped black stone, is the throne. And in the throne, like a thing that was grown there rather than placed, Kael. She has heard descriptions. Descriptions are useless. They failed to account for the way he consumes space, not through movement but through pure gravitational insistence, as though the room has quietly reorganized itself around the fact of him. He is immense in the way that mountains are immense, specific and permanent and entirely indifferent to your opinion of it. He is watching her walk toward him. He does not smile. He does not shift. He watches the way a wolf watches something moving across open ground, calculating distance, measuring pace, noting which leg bears slightly more weight. Seraphine does not look away from him. 10 feet from the base of the throne platform, she stops. The silence is absolute. Marshal Vedrick, the pack's ceremonial voice, a man built like a door and twice as expressive, steps forward from his position at the throne's left. When he speaks, his voice is trained for exactly this, for making small things sound enormous, and enormous things sound inevitable. Seraphine Ashveil, last daughter of the Ashveil Treaty House. You have been offered in covenant bond to the Alpha King of Iron Moor, Kael of the Black Range, sovereign of the 7 Pact territories, voice of the ancient compact. He pauses. The pause is choreographed. Kneel and receive the mark of the covenant, or the treaty between the lowlands and the Pact territories dies in this hall. Tonight, the torches flicker. Somewhere deep in the stone walls, something structural shifts and settles. Seraphine's knees do not move. The silence stretches from ceremonial to uncomfortable to something with edges. A low sound begins, not from one throat but from 200 simultaneously, a vibration that lives below the range of hearing and above the range of ignoring. The pack, growling in unison, not loudly but with the calm certainty of things that do not need to raise their voice to be believed. Then Kael speaks. He has not moved. He has not needed to. His voice carries across the hall as though he is standing directly behind her ear. The hall is waiting, girl. Seraphine does not flinch. Her voice, when it comes, is pitched to carry, clear and steady and aimed at every single set of glowing eyes in the room. My name is Seraphine. I'll answer to it. The growling sharpens. Marshal Vedrick's jaw tightens visibly. Something moves in Kael's expression, minute, almost invisible, and then it is gone. Seraphine, then, he says. The hall is still waiting. I was told I was brought here as a partner in the covenant, she answers. A partner stands across from another partner. I don't see anyone kneeling on your end of this arrangement. The intake of breath moves through the hall like a physical thing, like a wave hitting stone. Someone near the back, young, armored, with the specific kind of anger that belongs to men who have never had it questioned, actually laughs. Once. Short and ugly. Then Kael stands. He doesn't say anything. He simply stands, and the laughter dies, and the hall becomes a different kind of quiet. He descends the platform steps with the unhurried certainty of something that has never needed to hurry. He stops 3 feet from her. Up close, he is a geography, the jaw, the scar that runs from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, the eyes that are not quite amber and not quite gold and are focused on her with an intensity that most people probably experience as a physical pressure. "Do you know what you just did?" he asks. His voice is low. "For her only." "Made my position clear," she says, matching his register. "You made yourself a target. Every dominant wolf in this hall just heard you refuse the Covenant protocol. Half of them are now deciding whether I'm too weak to enforce it." "And what are you deciding?" For 1 full second, long enough to mean something, Kael looks at her as though she is a problem he did not anticipate. As though the equations he walked into this hall carrying have just quietly rearranged themselves into something new. He turns to the hall. The Covenant daughter has arrived after a 3-day journey on mountain roads, he announces, his voice filling the space completely. "The formal binding will proceed at the peak of the Ironmoor moon, 3 nights hence. Clear the hall." The murmur is immediate and dissatisfied, a current running through 200 bodies. Vedrick leans close, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Alpha, the law says." "I know what the law says, Vedrick. I wrote half of it." He does not look at Seraphine again. He turns and walks back toward the platform, back straight, unhurried. But as he passes her, close enough that the warmth of him crosses the distance between them like a hand reaching out, he speaks. Too quiet for anything but her ears. "You have 3 nights to learn the difference between courage and suicide, Seraphine Ashveil." She watches him go. And only when the last of the pack has filed out, when the great doors have sealed shut behind her and she is alone in the flickering dark of the Ashen Hall, only then does she let her hands unclench. The half-moon impressions of her own nails are pressed white into her palms. She looks down at them. She breathes. 3 nights is enough, she says quietly, to no one. The torches don't answer. But somewhere deep in the Citadel, past the stone and the dark, something howls. Chapter 2. They give her a guard. He is not introduced. He does not offer his name. He materializes at her left shoulder the moment the great hall doors seal shut behind her, a wall of muscle and silence in dark leather armor, his eyes carrying that same low amber burn that every set of eyes in this citadel seems to carry. He does not touch her. He simply begins walking, and the expectation that she will follow is so absolute, so structurally built into the gesture, that refusing it would feel less like defiance and more like arguing with gravity. Seraphine follows. The corridors of the Ironmoor Citadel are not built for comfort. They are built for defense, narrow enough that 2 people cannot walk abreast without choosing to, ceilinged low enough that a tall man must carry himself carefully, carved from the same black granite as the hall in a way that makes the whole structure feel less like a building and more like a burrow, like something that understands, on an architectural level, that the world outside is dangerous. Iron sconces line the walls at intervals. The flames inside them burn without flickering. She doesn't look too closely at why. They pass 3 levels of staircase. They pass a corridor that smells powerfully of steel and animal and old blood, the armory, she thinks, or the training grounds, or both. They pass a pair of sentinels at a junction who track her movement with their eyes without moving any other part of their bodies, the way cats watch birds through glass. No one speaks. Finally, the guard stops before a door. It is not a dungeon door. She had been quietly prepared for a dungeon door, had spent some portion of the 3-day mountain journey steeling herself against exactly that, the cold, the damp, the particular humiliation of a cell. But this door is heavy oak, iron-banded, and when the guard produces a key and turns it in the lock, what swings open is not a cell. It is a room. Large, even. A fireplace already burning. A bed with actual linen. A window, narrow, yes, and set high in the wall, and certainly not large enough for a person to climb through, but a window nonetheless, showing a rectangle of blue-black mountain sky and, just visible at its edge, the beginning of the Ironmoor moon. She walks to the center of the room. She turns around. The guard is still in the doorway. "Is there a lock on this side?" she asks. He looks at her the way people look at someone who has said something in a language they technically speak but find faintly absurd. He pulls the door shut. She hears the key turn from the outside. Int. The Ashen Citadel. Seraphine's chamber, later. The fire has burned down to a deep, steady amber by the time she stops pretending she might sleep. She has done a full inventory of the room twice. She has tested the window, too high, too narrow, and the drop on the other side is a vertical face of black rock that ends somewhere she cannot see from this angle. She has examined the fireplace for any architectural sentimentality about secret passages and found only stone and soot. She has sat on the edge of the bed and stood up again and sat down and stood up again until she recognized what she was doing and made herself stop. She is standing at the window, watching the moon clear the ridge of the eastern mountain face, when the door opens. She does not startle. She turns around slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who has decided that startling is a thing she no longer does. Kael fills the doorway the way he filled the throne, completely, and with that same gravitational quality, as though the space behind him has subtly ceased to matter. He is not in his formal furs now. He is wearing a plain dark tunic, the sleeves pushed to the elbows, a fact which is somehow more unsettling than the furs. The furs were armor, were performance. This is just him. He carries no weapon that she can see, which tells her only that he doesn't feel he needs one. He steps inside. He closes the door behind him. He does not lock it. She notices this. For a long moment they simply look at each other across the amberlit room, and Seraphine has the very specific thought that this is what it must feel like to be the smaller animal in an encounter that hasn't decided yet what it is. "You should be asleep," he says. "You should knock," she answers. Something moves at the corner of his mouth. It is not quite a smile. It is the shape a smile would leave behind. He walks to the fireplace. He does not ask permission. He crouches before it, this enormous man, folding himself down to the level of the low flames with an ease that is almost offensive, and adds 2 lengths of wood from the stack beside the grate with the unhurried practicality of someone who has done this 10,000 times. She watches him do it. She cannot entirely explain why watching him do something so ordinary feels so disorienting. "You're not afraid," he says. It is not a question. He is looking at the fire, not at her. "Would it help if I were? It would make things simpler." "For you," she says. He looks up at her then. The firelight catches the scar along his jaw and throws it into sharp relief, a clean line, precise, the kind of scar that comes from something intentional rather than something accidental. "For both of us," he says. Fear is a language everyone in this citadel speaks. It smooths things over. A human girl who isn't afraid is a variable nobody knows how to calculate. "Good," she says. "Variables are harder to dismiss." He stands. He is very tall when he stands. She is already aware of this, but the room is smaller than the hall was, and the awareness is correspondingly larger. "Why did you do it?" he asks. "In the hall. You had to know how it would read." "I read it exactly as I intended it." "You intended to look like a liability." "I intended to look like a person." She holds his gaze. "There's a difference. I suspect this citadel has forgotten it." A silence moves through the room. It is not the silence of the hall. That was a weapon, cold and sharpened. This silence is something else. Something that has not decided its nature yet. Kael moves toward the door. He stops with his hand on the iron latch and doesn't turn around. 3 nights, he says quietly. That is how long you have before the pack's patience runs out and the law stops being a tool and becomes a sentence. I cannot hold them longer than that without it costing something I cannot afford to spend. Then we'd better use the 3 nights well, she says. He turns his head slightly. Not enough to look at her directly. Just enough that she can see the line of his profile, the hard angle of his jaw. You came here expecting to die, he says. It is not an accusation. It is said with a flatness that is somehow worse. Seraphine is quiet for a moment. I came here expecting to be unmade, she says finally. Dying and being unmade are not the same thing. I decided a long time ago which one I could live with. Now he does turn. Just slightly. Just enough that the firelight catches his eyes, and she can see in them, underneath the calculation, underneath the careful steadiness of a man who has learned to show the world only what he chooses, something that looks almost like recognition. Like he understands, in some specific and personal way, exactly what she means. Then it closes. Shuts like a door behind a face. He lifts the latch. Don't go near the eastern corridor after dark, he says. Audriel's sentinels patrol it. They are not under instruction to be gentle with strays. Is that a warning or a test? He opens the door. Go to sleep, Seraphine. He steps out. The door closes. This time, she notices, she does not hear the key turn. She stands in the middle of the room for a long moment, the fire crackling softly at her back, the narrow window throwing a bar of cold moonlight across the stone floor between her feet. She looks down at it. She thinks about a man who tends fires in rooms that aren't his and warns instead of threatens and leaves doors unlocked when he doesn't have to. She thinks about 3 nights. She lies down on the bed without undressing, her boots still on, her hands folded on her stomach, and she stares at the ceiling and she does not sleep for a very long time. But she is smiling. Just slightly. Just enough. Chapter 3. She finds the letter on the 3rd morning. Not the 1st morning. The 1st morning brings only a tray of food left outside her door like an offering, and the sound of the citadel waking around her, boots on stone and distant voices and the low resonant call of something she cannot identify that rolls through the mountain at sunrise like a second bell. Not the 2nd morning either. The 2nd morning she spends mapping every corridor she is permitted to walk, filing the geography of the citadel away in the back of her mind the way her father taught her to file everything. Quietly, thoroughly, without announcing that she is doing it. The 3rd morning, she wakes before the light, and the letter is there. It has been slipped under the door in the dark. No seal. No name on the outside. Just a folded square of parchment on the cold stone floor, pale as a held breath. She picks it up. She does not open it immediately. She sits on the edge of the bed and holds it and looks at it and makes herself think carefully about what it means that someone in this citadel knows how to move past a locked door without a sound. Or, more accurately, past an unlocked door, which is either carelessness or an invitation, and she has already decided that Kael of the Black Range is not a careless man. She opens it. The handwriting is not his. She knows this immediately, though she has never seen his handwriting. She knows it the way you know certain things about people before you can explain the knowing. This handwriting is cramped and lateral, written in haste, written by someone whose hands were not entirely steady. It says, "The treaty your father signed was not the treaty that was read to him. The land concessions in the eastern reaches were doubled in the final copy. The mountain passes your people used for the winter migration were closed in a clause buried on the 4th page. Your family did not give you to the Alpha King for peace. They gave you to him because they had no eastern reaches left. No passes. No winter route. You were not a gift. You were the last move in a game they had already lost. Be careful who you trust in this citadel. Be especially careful who you trust outside it. There is no signature." She reads it twice. Then she folds it precisely along its original creases, tucks it into the inner lining of her boot, and sits for a moment with her hands flat on her knees and her eyes on the middle distance. Then she stands up. She puts her boots on. She goes to find Kael. The Ashen Citadel, the upper training ground, morning. She finds him in the upper training yard before the rest of the citadel has fully committed to being awake. He is alone. This surprises her. She had imagined him perpetually attended, perpetually observed, a man who exists only in the context of an audience. But the yard is empty except for him, and he is moving through a sequence of forms with a long-handled blade that she does not recognize as any fighting style she has ever seen. Something older, something that looks less like combat training and more like a conversation being held with the weapon itself. He is not wearing a shirt. This is noted and immediately filed away in the part of her mind she has designated for information that is not currently useful. He stops when he hears her cross the threshold of the yard. He does not look startled. He does not look anything in particular. He lowers the blade to his side and looks at her with the patient, contained expression of a man waiting to find out what kind of morning this is going to be. She crosses the yard. She stops 4 feet from him. She looks up at him. He is a great deal taller at 4 feet than he is at the length of a hall. And she says, with no preamble because she has decided that preamble is something she can no longer afford, "Tell me about the treaty." Something happens in his face. It is small and fast and she almost misses it, a tightening around the eyes, a fractional stillness, the specific quality of a person who has just heard a sentence they were expecting and dreading simultaneously. "You'll need to be more specific," he says. "There have been a great many treaties." "The Ashveil Treaty," she says. "The one my father signed. The one with 4 pages. The training yard is very quiet. Somewhere above them, on the high ramparts, a sentinel walks his circuit with the slow, metronomic reliability of a man who has done it so many times the body does it without the mind's involvement. Kael sets the blade against the yard wall. He does not sit. He stands with his arms at his sides and looks at her with an expression she cannot fully read. Something that lives between guilt and calculation and something older than either. "Where did you hear about the 4th page?" he asks. "Does it matter?" It matters because someone in this citadel is feeding you information, and I need to know whether they are feeding it to you because they want to help you or because they want to use you. Perhaps both, she says. Tell me about the treaty, Kael. It is the first time she has used his name without a title attached, and they both notice it, and neither of them comments on it, and the not commenting is its own kind of statement. He is quiet for a long moment. He looks at the mountains visible above the citadel wall, the high black peaks catching the early light and throwing it back cold and clean and indifferent. Your father came to the negotiating table with very little left to negotiate with, he says finally. His voice is level. He is choosing his words with the careful precision of a man dismantling something that could still detonate. The eastern reaches had been raided 3 consecutive winters. The migration passes were already informally controlled by our border sentinels, not by my order, but the result was the same. Your father knew this. He came to make the best of a bad situation. And the 4th page. A pause. The 4th page was not in the draft I approved, he says. She looks at him. Say that again, she says quietly. The treaty I signed had 3 pages, he says. Standard concession terms, migration rights preserved, a covenant bond to be arranged at a date to be determined. What your father signed had a 4th page. I did not know about the 4th page until 4 months after the ink was dry. The morning light is strengthening. It falls across the yard in long pale bars, catching the dust stirred up by his earlier forms. She is watching his face very carefully, looking for the particular quality of dishonesty, which she has learned over 19 years has a texture to it, a smoothness, a place where the grain runs the wrong direction. She does not find it. What she finds instead is worse. What she finds instead looks like a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has gotten almost good enough at it that it barely shows. Who wrote the 4th page? She asks. The same faction that has been trying to remove me from this throne for the last 3 years, he says. The High Matriarch's Council. They operate in the spaces between my authority and the pack law, technically inside my court, functionally answerable to no one. They have been dismantling the alliances I've built, one treaty at a time, because alliances make me strong and isolated territories make me manageable. They used my family, she says. Her voice is very even. They used my family to weaken you and weaken us simultaneously. Yes. And my father's eastern reaches. A beat. Gone, he says. Absorbed into the 3rd Territory's holdings 18 months ago. I reversed what I could. The migration passes were reopened by my direct order 6 months after I found the 4th page. But the land concessions, he stops. Some things, once they are taken, cannot be handed back without unraveling a dozen other agreements. She is silent for a long moment. She is thinking about her father. She is thinking about the specific way he had looked in the final weeks before she left, not the way a man looks when he is giving something up for a reason, but the way a man looks when there is no reason anymore, when there is only the giving up. She is thinking about her younger brother Kael, who used to run the eastern fields at harvest time and name the mountains in the distance like they were old friends. There are no fields anymore. You could have told me this, she says. When you came to my room. When you gave me the warning. You could have told me any of this. You had been in this citadel for less than a day, he says. I didn't know what you were yet. And now. He looks at her for a long moment. The morning light does something complicated to his expression, softens the geometry of it, makes the scar less severe, makes him look briefly like a man rather than a monument. Now, he says carefully, I think you may be the most dangerous thing to walk through those gates in a very long time. Because I won't kneel, she says. Because you won't kneel, he agrees. And because you are standing in my training yard at dawn asking me questions that half my war council has been too afraid to ask for 3 years. And because. He stops himself. She waits. And because, he says finally, quietly, like a man confessing something he hasn't said aloud before, the High Matriarch's faction did not count on the Ashveil girl being someone worth counting. The words settle between them like stones dropped into still water, sending rings outward in every direction. She looks at him. He looks at her. For the first time since she walked through the iron gates of the Ironmoor Citadel, Seraphine Ashveil does not feel like a piece being moved across someone else's board. She feels, very quietly, like a player. Tell me about the High Matriarch, she says. And something shifts in Kael's expression. Something that is not quite relief and not quite hope but lives in the neighborhood of both. He reaches down and picks up the blade. He holds it out to her, hilt first. "Have you ever trained with a long blade?" he asks. She looks at the weapon. She looks at him. "No," she says. "Good," he says. "Easier to teach correctly when there's nothing to unlearn." She takes the blade. It is heavier than she expected. She adjusts her grip without being told to, finding the balance point by instinct. And she sees him notice this, sees the small recalibration move through his expression. "Show me," she says. He steps around behind her to correct her stance, and his hands, large, careful, precise, settle on her shoulders to adjust the angle of them, and the warmth of him at her back is a fact that registers in her body before her mind has the chance to govern it. She keeps her eyes forward. She keeps her breathing even. She thinks, 3 nights. She thinks, it will not be enough. Chapter 4. She hears about the assembly before she is summoned to it. It comes through the walls the way most information in the Citadel comes to her, in fragments, in the spaces between things, in the quality of silence that precedes a door opening. She is in the corridor outside the Eastern Library when she catches the word assembly moving between 2 sentinels at the far junction, low and quick, the way words move when they are not meant to travel. She catches it. She files it. She continues walking as though she heard nothing at all. 20 minutes later, the guard outside her door, a different one from the first night, broader, with the flat, watchful eyes of a man paid specifically to notice things, tells her that her presence is required in the great hall at the midday bell. He does not say please. She puts on the grey robes. She braids her hair. She looks at herself once in the small square of polished metal that serves as a mirror in her chamber, and she has a brief, private conversation with her own reflection about the nature of walking into rooms that have been designed to diminish you. She wins the argument. She goes. The great hall in daylight is a different creature than the great hall at night. At night it had been all fire and shadow and the amber burn of 200 pairs of watching eyes. In daylight, cold mountain light falls through the high clerestory windows in long pale columns that illuminate the dust and the granite and the absolute indifference of the architecture. It is less theatrical in the light, more honest, more like what it actually is, a room built for the exercise of power, stripped of all decorative pretense about what that means. There are perhaps 60 wolves assembled. Not the full pack, a selection, she understands, which is in some ways worse. The full pack is a crowd. 60 is an audience. At the center of the hall, standing rather than seated on the throne, is Kael. Beside him, 1 step back and 1 step to the right, is a man she has not been formally introduced to but has identified through observation and the process of elimination. He is lean where Kael is broad, with a face arranged in the permanent expression of someone cataloguing grievances. His eyes are the coldest amber she has seen in this citadel, not burning, not warm, but the amber of something preserved, something stopped in time. This is Audrielle, the beater. She is certain of it. She walks to the center of the hall and stops. The silence is familiar now. She has decided to wear it differently, not as something imposed on her but as something she is choosing to inhabit. There is a distinction. It matters. Kael looks at her. There is nothing in his face that she recognizes from the training yard. Nothing from the firelit room. The man who corrected her blade grip with careful hands and spoke about the high matriarch with the exhausted honesty of someone finally setting down a weight. That man is not present in this room. What is present is the Alpha King of Ironmoor, and he wears the title the way the Citadel wears its stone, completely, and with no visible seams. Seraphine Ashveil, he says. His voice is formal. Carrying. Designed for the room. You have been in this citadel for 2 days without completing the covenant protocol. The pack requires an accounting. She understands, in the first second, what is happening. She understands it the way you understand a trap, not by seeing the mechanism but by recognizing the shape of the ground around it. Someone has forced this assembly. Someone has forced his hand, made it impossible for him to delay any further without the delay itself becoming the evidence of weakness they have been building their case around. Audrielle's eyes are on her. Patient. Almost satisfied. She looks at Kael. His expression gives her nothing. The covenant protocol, Audrielle says, stepping forward with the smoothness of a man who has been rehearsing this, requires the covenant daughter to kneel before the Alpha and receive the mark of the pack bond within 3 days of her arrival. This is not custom. This is law. Written in the founding compact. Older than any of us standing in this room. He lets that sit. Tomorrow is the 3rd day, he continues. The assembly has gathered to witness the Alpha King reaffirm his commitment to the law he was sworn to uphold. He turns to look at Kael. The room turns with him. And Kael, Kael, who spoke to her in the dark about factions and fourth pages and the particular loneliness of a throne that is also a cage, looks at Seraphine with eyes that are flat and formal and completely unreadable, and says, "The Covenant daughter will kneel before the pack at tomorrow's eclipse, or the terms of the compact will be enforced in full." A murmur of satisfaction moves through the assembled wolves. Seraphine does not move. She is looking at Kael's hands. His hands, which are clasped behind his back in the formal rest position of a man performing authority, and in the specific way they are clasped, the right thumb pressing hard against the inside of the left wrist, a small, rhythmic pressure that no one in this room is positioned to see except her, standing directly in front of him. She thinks, he is telling me something. She thinks, he is telling me this is performance. She thinks, trust it or don't, Seraphine. Decide now. She lifts her chin. I understand the law, she says, addressing the room rather than Kael, her voice carrying to every corner. I understand what is required of me. I will present myself at the eclipse tomorrow night. She does not say she will kneel. She notices that she does not say she will kneel. She notices that Kael notices this too, and that something, infinitesimal, controlled, shifts in his jaw. The assembly is satisfied, Audriel says, though his eyes suggest the assembly is not entirely satisfied, suggest that the assembly, or at least its most interested member, would have preferred something more conclusive, more humiliating, something that ended with the sound of her knees on granite. Assembly dismissed, says Kael. She turns and walks out of the hall. He finds her an hour later in the one place she suspected he would look first, among books. The Eastern Library is smaller than she expected a Citadel library to be, and older than she expected anything this far into the mountain range to be. The shelves carved directly into the rock face and the volumes on them wrapped in oilskin against the damp. She has been working her way along the oldest section, reading spines, when she hears the door. She does not turn around. You performed well, she says. His footsteps stop somewhere behind her. Seraphine. No, she says, still not turning. Her finger trails along a row of spines, dates, territorial records, the dry bureaucratic record of 100 years of pack governance. I'm not angry. I want to be precise about that. I understand why you did it. I understood it while it was happening. Then why won't you look at me? She stops. She turns around. He is closer than she anticipated. Perhaps 6 feet, standing between 2 columns of shelving with his arms at his sides, the formal bearing of the hall entirely gone now, replaced with something that looks considerably more like a man and considerably less like a title. Because, she says carefully, looking at you in that hall and looking at you right now are 2 completely different experiences, and I am trying to decide what to do with that. He is quiet. You lied to your court, she says. With your face. Completely. Without hesitation. Yes. You are very good at it. Yes. How do I know, she says, and her voice is level, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Which version is the lie? The hall or here? He looks at her for a long moment. The library is very still. The mountain cold seeps through the rock walls and the small brazier in the corner does its inadequate best against it. I have been the Alpha King of Ironmoor for 7 years, he says. I took the throne at 22 from a father who ruled through terror and called it strength. I spent 3 years rebuilding every alliance he burned, every treaty he broke, every pact bond he severed because the weakness of others made him feel large. He pauses. I have performed in that hall for 7 years. I know every inflection that keeps men in line and every silence that prevents bloodshed. I am very good at it because I have had to be. He takes 1 step toward her. But I have not, he says quietly, tended a fire in someone else's room in 7 years. I have not stood in a training yard and chosen to hand someone a blade in 7 years. I have not told anyone about the 4th page. The library breathes around them, old paper and cold stone and the particular intimacy of rooms full of accumulated words. Why me? She asks. Because you walked into that hall knowing exactly what it was, he says. And you walked in anyway, and you stood there without shaking. And when I came to your room that first night I expected to find someone broken or someone performing courage, and instead I found someone who was just. He stops. Just what? She asks. Awake, he says. Just entirely, completely awake. She looks at him. She thinks about the letter in her boot. She thinks about her father's face in the last weeks. She thinks about Kael and the eastern fields and the mountains he used to name like friends. She thinks about a man who rewrote alliances and reversed migration closures and still carries the weight of what he couldn't undo. Audriel wrote the 4th page, she says. It is not a question. Something moves through his expression like a stone dropped through still water, fast, and then smooth again, but she sees the ripple. I have no proof, he says carefully. That isn't what I asked. A long pause. Audriel, he says, has wanted the alpha seat since before I occupied it. He is patient in the way that very dangerous things are patient. Not because he lacks urgency, but because he understands that the right moment is worth waiting for. The High Matriarch's faction gives him resources and cover. I give him a problem, she says. An obstacle, he says. For now. And I am you, he says, and something shifts in his voice, something careful giving way to something more direct. Was supposed to be the mechanism by which he finally removed me. A human covenant daughter who refuses the protocol, forces a breach of compact law, hands him the legal grounds to call a challenge. Clean. Efficient. But I didn't breach the protocol, she says. I said I would present myself at the eclipse. You bought us one more day. What happens in one more day? He looks at her steadily. That, he says, depends entirely on what you are willing to do. The brazier pops and settles. A log shifts. The cold leans in from the walls. Seraphine looks at Kael, this man who lies to his court with flawless precision and speaks the truth in libraries and empty training yards. This man who is either the most trustworthy person in this citadel or the most dangerous, and who may, she is beginning to suspect, be both simultaneously. She reaches into her boot. She holds out the letter. He takes it. He reads it. His expression does not change, but she watches his hands and his hands tighten once, briefly, on the parchment. Do you know who sent it? She asks. I have a suspicion, he says. Is it someone we can trust? He folds the letter. He looks at her. And for just a moment, just a breath's worth, the Alpha King is entirely absent from his face, and what is there instead is something unguarded and tired and unexpectedly human. I don't know yet, he says honestly, but I'm beginning to think the more important question is whether you and I can trust each other. She holds his gaze. Ask me something true, she says. Something you actually want to know. Not strategy. Not positioning. Something true. He is quiet for a moment. Then, are you frightened? He asks. Not of the pack. Not of the law. Of this. Of what this is becoming. She considers the question with the seriousness it deserves. Yes, she says. Good, he says quietly. So am I. She had not expected that. She looks at him, really looks, the way she has been careful not to in the training yard and in the firelit room and in every space where looking too directly felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make, and she finds that the looking is easier than she expected, and considerably more complicated. Tomorrow night, she says. The eclipse. Tomorrow night, he agrees. I need you to trust me, she says. When the moment comes. Whatever I do, I need you to trust it. He looks at her for a long time. That, he says finally, is either the beginning of something or the end of everything. Yes, she says simply. She takes the letter back from his hand. Their fingers do not quite touch. Almost. The almost is its own complete sentence. She tucks the letter back into her boot. She walks to the library door. She stops with her hand on the frame, her back to him, the cold corridor stretching out ahead. Kael, she says. Yes. You said I was the most dangerous thing to walk through those gates in a long time. I did. You were right, she says. But not for the reason you thought. She walks out into the corridor. Behind her, in the library, she hears nothing. But she knows he is smiling. Just slightly. Just enough. Chapter 5. She cannot sleep. This is not new. Sleep in the Ironmoor Citadel has been a negotiation from the first night. Something she approaches carefully, circles, occasionally achieves for a few hours before the stone cold or the distant howling or the particular quality of her own thoughts drives her back to wakefulness. But tonight is different. Tonight the sleeplessness has a specific shape to it, a specific address. Tomorrow night is the eclipse. Tomorrow night is the altar and the pack and the moment that everything either holds or breaks. And she has a plan, the outline of one, the skeleton. But skeletons are not the same as living things, and in the dark of her chamber the difference feels enormous. She gets up. She puts her boots on. She wraps herself in the heavy wool blanket from the bed. She has decided that dignity is a resource to be managed, not performed, and warmth is currently more valuable than the appearance of preparedness. And she goes out into the corridor, past the guard who tracks her movement with his eyes but does not stop her, and she finds the staircase that leads to the upper ramparts. The door at the top is not locked. She has noticed this about the Citadel. The doors that matter, the ones between her and the outside world, the ones between her and freedom or escape, those are locked with the quiet thoroughness of a system that has thought carefully about every possible exit. But the internal doors, the ones that lead simply from one part of the Citadel to another, are open more often than not, as though the Citadel's security is pointed outward, entirely, and the inside is considered solved. She steps out onto the ramparts. The night is enormous up here. The Citadel is built high into the mountain face, and from the upper ramparts the world falls away in every direction. South to the long dark valley where the Ashveil lowlands begin their gradual descent toward the coast, north to the black peaks of the higher range where nothing human lives, east and west to the sprawl of the seven-pack territories laid out in darkness and dotted with the distant orange pinpricks of fires. The sky above is immense and crowded with stars and split down the middle by the pale road of the mountain moon, which tomorrow night will be consumed by eclipse and will turn the color of old blood. She stands at the rampart wall and looks out at all of it. She is thinking about her mother's hands, cold against her face. She is thinking about Kael. She is thinking about whether courage is still courage when it is the only option left, or whether it becomes something else at that point, something more like arithmetic, the simple calculation of a person who has counted their choices and found only one column with anything left in it. You'll freeze. She turns. Kael is leaning against the door frame behind her. He is dressed for the cold, heavy cloak, dark wool, and he is holding 2 cups of something that steams in the night air. He looks, in this specific moment, almost unbearably ordinary. A large man in a dark cloak holding 2 hot drinks on a cold night, his hair disordered slightly by the wind, his expression carrying none of the formal architecture of the hall or even the careful guardedness of the library. He just looks tired. He looks like someone who also could not sleep. She turns back to the view and says nothing, which he apparently correctly interprets as an invitation, because he crosses the rampart and stands beside her at the wall and holds one of the cups out until she takes it. It is something hot and dark and faintly bitter with an undercurrent of something smoky and sweet that she does not recognize. "What is this?" she asks. "Pinebark tea," he says. "Old pack remedy. It doesn't taste like much, but it keeps the cold out of your lungs." She drinks it. He is right. It doesn't taste like much. But within a few minutes she can feel the warmth of it moving through her chest like a slow tide, and the sharp edge of the mountain cold retreats to a more manageable distance. They stand in silence for a while, which she is finding, against all her earlier expectations, is something that is possible with him. Silence with most people is a thing that requires management, that fills up with the pressure of everything unspoken until someone capitulates and speaks to relieve it. Silence with Kael simply exists. It has no particular agenda. "You couldn't sleep either," she says. "I don't sleep well the night before anything important," he says. "It's been this way since I was a boy. My father used to say it was weakness." "Your father sounds like he was a remarkable authority on weakness," she says, for someone who apparently had quite a lot of it. Something moves in Kael's expression, surprised, briefly, and then something that might be the first genuinely unguarded laugh she has seen from him, abbreviated before it fully arrives but present. He agrees. He ruled for 23 years through a very simple system. He found the thing each person in his court valued most, and he held it, like a hand around a throat, not squeezing, just present, just reminding. And what did he hold over you? A pause. The wind moves across the ramparts, cold and specific. "The pack," he says simply. "He knew I loved them. Not the institution. Not the power. The actual people. The families in the lower territories. The young wolves coming up through the ranks. The elders who remembered what the Iron Moor used to be before he made it into what it became. He knew I would do anything to protect them from him." Another pause. "And he used that, comprehensively, for years." She looks at his profile against the night sky, the scar along his jaw, the set of his shoulders. "Is that why you took the throne?" she asks. "I took the throne," he says, "because one morning I woke up and did the arithmetic and understood that every year I waited, more people paid the cost of my waiting, and that at some point, not acting becomes its own kind of action." She understands this. She understands it in the specific, physical way that you understand things that have also happened to you. How old were you? She asks. 22. That's very young to carry all of that. You're 19, he says, and you're standing on a mountain rampart the night before you walk into the most dangerous ritual in pack law with a plan you haven't told me yet. I've told you the outline. The outline, he says, is that I should trust you. That is less an outline and more a single sentence. It's the most important sentence, she says. He looks at her. The moon is very bright tonight. It falls across the ramparts in cold silver bars and catches the steam rising from their cups and turns it to something briefly luminous. Tell me about Kael, he says. She goes still. How do you know that name? Your convoy manifest, he says. Standard intelligence. Brother, younger by 4 years, listed as resident of the Ashveil Eastern Holdings. He pauses. Holdings that no longer exist. She is quiet for a moment. He's 15, she says. He was living with our mother's sister when I left. In the lowland villages. Far enough from the eastern reaches that the consolidation didn't touch them directly. A pause. He didn't understand why I was leaving. I didn't explain it well enough. I'm not sure there was a way to explain it well enough to a 15-year-old who still thought the world was a place where things worked out. Do you still think that? He asks. That things work out. She considers this seriously, the way she considers everything. I think, she says carefully, that things resolve. I'm not always sure resolution and working out are the same thing. But I think there is a shape to things. An eventual shape. And I think the only way to find it is to keep moving toward it even when you can't see it yet. He is watching her. That, he says quietly, is either the most hopeful thing I've heard in this citadel or the most heartbreaking. I can't decide which. Maybe both, she says. Things are allowed to be both. The wind shifts. The cold deepens. Without quite deciding to, they have moved slightly closer together at the wall, not touching, but the distance between them is now the kind of distance that is aware of itself. I need to tell you something, he says. About tomorrow night. About what I did 3 days ago that you don't know yet. She turns to look at him. His jaw is set. He is looking out over the valley. When I delayed the covenant protocol in the hall, he says, I didn't just delay it on my own authority. I called in a debt. An old compact clause that allows the Alpha to defer the binding under specific territorial circumstances. Using it cost me the support of 2 of the 7 territory representatives, men who were already uncertain about my leadership and needed only a demonstration of what they considered irregular judgment to move their allegiance to Audriel's faction. She is very still. You lost 2 territories, she says. I bought you 3 days, he says. Yes. Kael. Don't, he says quietly. Don't apologize. I made the calculation. It was the correct calculation. How is losing 2 territorial alliances the correct calculation? He turns to look at her then. Full on. In the moonlight his eyes are not amber but something darker and more complex, the color of deep water with light moving in it. Because, he says, those 2 representatives were always going to move to Audriel eventually. Their support was conditional in a way that made it functionally worthless in any real crisis. What I lost was the appearance of their support, which was costing me more in political maintenance than it was giving me in actual strength. She looks at him. And the real reason, she says softly. A long pause. The wind. The cold. The enormous night around them. You had been in this citadel for 12 hours, he says. You had walked into my hall and refused to be diminished, and you had stood in front of 200 wolves and told them your name like it meant something, and you had looked at me. He stops. You had looked at me in a way that no one in this citadel has looked at me in a very long time. How? She asks. Her voice is very quiet. Like I was a person, he says. Not a throne. Not a problem. Not a symbol. A person. She looks at him. The space between them is very small now. She is not entirely certain how it became so small. The mountain cold has pushed them together by increments, or the conversation has, or something older and less rational than either. You are a person, she says. I know, he says. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else know it. She reaches out. She does not plan to. Her hand moves with the independence of something that has made its own decision, and she presses her palm flat against his chest, over the wool of his cloak, over the layers between her skin and his, feeling the solid reality of him, the warmth, the slow steady rhythm of his heart beneath her hand. He goes very still. He looks down at her hand. He looks up at her face. He does not move. He breathes. She can feel it, the slight rise and fall beneath her palm, the rhythm of it, steady and then slightly less steady, the way a very controlled thing sounds when something has gotten past its control. Seraphine, he says. Just her name. Nothing attached to it. No warning, no question. Just her name in his voice at that register, which turns out to be its own complete and sufficient sentence. I know, she says softly. She takes her hand back. She wraps both hands around her cup and turns back to the view and breathes the cold mountain air and lets the silence be what it is. Beside her, Kael is very quiet for a very long time. Your plan, he says finally. For tomorrow night. Yes. Tell me more than one sentence. She looks out over the dark valley, the distant fires, the road she came in on, invisible now in the dark, leading back south toward everything that used to exist. The Covenant Protocol, she says, was written to bind a human to a pack, to transfer loyalty, formally, through ritual. Blood on stone. The pack receiving the blood accepts responsibility for the human. Protection. Provision. The compact goes both ways. Yes. But the original compact, she says, the founding text, the version before the High Matriarch's Council began amending it, the blood on stone doesn't specify whose blood. Does it? A silence. Where did you find the founding text? He asks. His voice is very careful. Eastern Library, she says. Third shelf from the bottom. Oilskin wrapped. Dated 300 years before anything else on that shelf. Another silence. Longer. Seraphine. The blood on stone doesn't specify whose blood, she says again. Which means the compact can be completed by either party. Which means if I bleed for the pack instead of kneeling to it. You reframe the entire ritual, he says slowly. You don't submit to the pack. You offer yourself to it. As a partner. Not a possession, she says. Yes. The night is enormous around them. The moon is very bright. It's never been done, he says. It's never been tried, she says. Those aren't the same thing. He is quiet for a long time. She can feel him thinking beside her, the particular quality of a very large, very precise mind working through implications, checking angles, measuring risks. Audriel will challenge it, he says. Let him. The High Matriarch's Council will call it a breach. Let them. The founding text supersedes the amended compact. You said you wrote half the law. Is that true? Yes. Then you know where every door is, she says. I need you to know which ones to open when the moment comes. He looks at her. This could end everything, he says. Or begin it. Yes, she says. I've noticed those tend to be the same moment. He takes her empty cup from her hands, both cups in one of his, held easily, and he looks at her for one long, specific, unguarded moment in the mountain moonlight, and what is in his face is something she does not have a name for yet but intends to find one. Go inside, he says quietly. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow night requires everything you have. And if I can't sleep, then lie down and let your body rest even if your mind won't, he says. It's what I do. Does it work? No, he says. But it's better than standing on a rampart in the cold. She almost smiles. She moves toward the door. She stops. Kael, she says, her back to him. Yes. When this is over, she says carefully, one way or another. When the eclipse is done and the pack has decided what it's decided, I want you to tell me about the Iron Moor, the real version, the families in the lower territories, the young wolves coming up, the thing you actually love about it. A pause. Why? He asks. Because, she says, if I'm going to fight for something, I want to know what it looks like. She goes inside. Behind her on the ramparts, in the cold and the moonlight, she hears him exhale, long and slow and quiet. The sound of a man putting something down that he has been carrying alone for a very long time. She descends the stairs. She lies down on her bed. She does not sleep, but she breathes easier than she has since the convoy left the lowlands. And she thinks, tomorrow. And for the first time, the word does not feel like a wall. It feels like a door. Chapter 6. She knows something is wrong before she opens her eyes. It is a smell first. Not the pine smoke and wet granite of the Citadel's ordinary mornings. Something under that, something older and sharper, the particular scent of a large number of bodies that have been awake for a long time and are operating on something adjacent to patience but not quite patience itself. Something with more teeth. She opens her eyes. The fire in her chamber has been allowed to go out. This has not happened before. Every morning since her arrival, the fire has been maintained. She has never seen who tends it, has only noticed its presence as a quiet, consistent fact of her mornings, like a small proof that someone in this citadel has been tasked with her basic comfort. The absence of it now is not accidental. Fires do not go out by themselves in rooms that are being attended to. She sits up. She puts her boots on. She goes to the door. It is locked from the outside. She stands with her hand on the latch for a moment and does the specific, practiced work of not allowing the locked door to mean anything more than it means right now, in this moment, which is only that she cannot leave through this door, which is not the same as not being able to leave at all. She examines the room with the methodical attention she has been quietly developing since the first morning. The window, too high and too narrow. The fireplace, stone and soot with no architectural sentimentality. The walls, solid granite without seam or variation. She examines the door itself, the iron fittings of the lock, the gap between the base of the door and the stone floor. Under the door, just visible, is a shadow. Still, patient. Someone is standing outside. "I can see your feet," she says. A pause. The shadow shifts. Then a voice comes through the door, low, female, carrying the particular compressed quality of someone speaking at a volume calculated precisely for the distance of a door's thickness and no further. "The guard was replaced an hour ago. The man outside your door now reports to the Beta's household, not the Alpha's. I have perhaps 4 minutes before his circuit brings him back to this position." Seraphine is still. "Who are you?" she asks. "My name is Vila," the voice says. "I am the Citadel's record keeper. I have been the Citadel's record keeper for 11 years. I was the Citadel's record keeper when the previous Alpha's court amended the founding compact, and I copied every amendment by hand because that is what record keepers do, and I have regretted the precision of my penmanship every day since." A beat. "I sent you the letter," Vila says. Seraphine exhales slowly. "Tell me what's happening," she says. Audriel called a pre-eclipse assembly at dawn. Vila says, quickly now, the 4 minutes clearly present in her voice. Closed session. Senior pact members and the High Matriarch's 2 seated representatives. He presented a motion to the council arguing that the Alpha's repeated deferrals of the Covenant Protocol constitute a voluntary breach of the founding compact, that by failing to enforce the binding on schedule, the Alpha has forfeited his compact authority and the council is entitled to appoint a temporary governance seat pending formal challenge. Seraphine is very quiet. "His moving tonight," she says. "Before the eclipse. Not after." "He doesn't intend to let the eclipse happen," Vila says. "If the Covenant Protocol is completed correctly tonight, even in the modified form you are planning," a pause. "Yes, I know about the founding text. I am the record keeper. I put it on that shelf. I have been waiting 11 years for someone to find it. Why didn't you use it yourself?" "Because I am a record keeper," Vila says, with a flatness that carries 11 years of specific frustration in it. "And record keepers do not make history. We preserve it. And then occasionally we put it on a shelf at precisely the right height and wait for the right person to be desperate enough to read everything." Something that is almost a laugh moves through Seraphine's chest. "What is Audriel's timeline?" she asks. The council session concludes at midday. He needs a majority of 7 senior pact members to ratify the motion. He currently has 4. He needs 3 more before the eclipse bell. How close is he? 2 of the remaining 3 are uncommitted. The third is Warden Soren of the Northern Reaches. He has refused every approach Audriel has made for 2 years, but Audriel has something new on him. Something personal. I don't know what yet. And Kael. The Alpha was not present at the dawn session. He is being kept from knowing about it. How? His morning briefings are prepared by Marshal Vedrick. Vedrick is not entirely Kael's, Seraphine says. Vedrick is a man who has survived 4 changes of power in this citadel by being precisely useful to whoever currently needs precision, Vila says. He has not committed to Audriel, but he has agreed to delay the Alpha's morning intelligence by 3 hours in exchange for a promise of continued position. Which means Kael does not yet know about the council session. "I need to get out of this room." "I know. That is why I am here." A pause, and then the sound of metal, small, specific, sliding under the gap of the door. "That is a copy of the master key for this corridor. I had it made 6 months ago. I have been waiting for a morning when I would need it." Seraphine crouches and picks up the key. It is small. Brass. warm from being held. Vila, she says quietly. Why are you doing this? A silence, longer than the previous ones. Because, Vila says, I copied the 4th page. I copied it because I was told to, because I was a record keeper and that is what I do, and I told myself it was not my place to question the content of what I transcribed. And then I watched what happened to the Ashveil Eastern Reaches. And I watched what happened to the migration families who lost their winter roots. And I watched the Alpha spend 3 years trying quietly to undo what one night's work had done. Another pause. There is a version of complicity that wears the costume of neutrality. I wore it for a long time. I am tired of how it fits. Seraphine is quiet for a moment. Thank you, she says. Don't thank me, Vila says. Win. That's sufficient. The shadow under the door shifts and disappears. Seraphine looks at the key in her hand. She unlocks the door. She finds Kael in his private map room. She knows it is the map room because the door is slightly ajar and the slice of room visible through the gap is entirely covered in territorial maps. Great hand-drawn charts of the 7-pack territories pinned to every wall, annotated in several different hands, connected by lengths of colored cord that track alliances and borders and the political geometry of a kingdom that is always, apparently, in the process of renegotiating itself. She pushes the door open. Kael is standing at the central table with his back to her, leaning over a chart, and he turns at the sound of the door with the immediate full-body alertness of someone whose reflexes have never fully accepted the concept of a safe room. He takes in her expression. What happened? He says. She tells him. She does it quickly and completely, the way her father taught her to deliver important information. No preamble, no softening, every relevant fact in the order of its relevance. Audriel's dawn session. The council motion. The 4 votes and the 3 needed. Vedric's delay of the morning briefing. The locked room. Vila. She watches him absorb it. His expression does not collapse or fracture. It does something more interesting. It becomes very still, the way deep water becomes still before something large moves in it, a stillness that is not the absence of movement but the concentration of it. When she finishes, he is quiet for precisely 4 seconds. Then he moves. He crosses to the door and pulls it fully open and speaks into the corridor in a voice that is entirely different from his public voice. Lower, faster, stripped of all performance. The voice of a man issuing instructions to people he trusts. Fetch Warden Soren. Not a summons. Go yourself. Tell him it is personal and private and bring him to me in the lower study within the hour. Go now. A figure she has not fully registered, young, slight, with the watchful eyes of someone who has spent years learning to be present without being noticed, peels away from the corridor wall and is gone before she can fully focus on them. Kael closes the door. He turns back to the map table. Soren, she says. Vila said Audriel has something personal on him. I know what Audriel has on Soren, he says. He is looking at the territorial map, his finger tracing a border in the northern reaches without quite touching the paper. Soren's youngest son left the pack 3 years ago. Voluntarily. Chose a human life in the southern lowlands. In pack law, a warden's heir who voluntarily leaves the pack forfeits the warden's right to name succession. The territory reverts to alpha appointment upon the warden's death. He pauses. Audriel has been holding that statute over Soren's head for 2 years, reminding him quietly that with one formal declaration, Audriel could have Soren's territory reassigned to a Beto-aligned warden the moment Soren steps down. But you could counter that, she says. You have alpha appointment authority. You could guarantee Soren's succession regardless. I could, he says. I have not, because Soren has not asked me to. He is a proud man who has spent 40 years building his warden's seat, and the suggestion that he needs the alpha's protection to secure his own succession is complicated, she says. Sufficiently complicated that I have been waiting for him to come to me. And Audriel has been making sure he doesn't. Yes. She looks at the map. The northern reaches. The territory marked in dark ink at the top edge of the chart. The borders of it annotated in a hand she is beginning to recognize as Kael's. Let me talk to him, she says. Kael turns to look at her. Soren. When your man brings him. Let me talk to him first. Before you. Why? Because, she says. You are his alpha and he is a proud man, and every conversation you have ever had with him has been freighted with hierarchy and the history of everything unsaid between you. I am a human girl from the lowlands who has been in this citadel for 3 days and have no position and no history and no angle that he needs to defend against. Kael looks at her for a long moment. You have been here for 3 days, he says slowly. Yes. and you are proposing to negotiate with a 40-year pack veteran on my behalf. I am proposing to have a conversation with a father, she says, about his son. Those are different things. He is quiet. You know about the southern lowlands, he says. Soren's son lives in your territory. She had not connected this until he said it, and then she had, immediately and completely, and the connection reshapes several things simultaneously. What is his name? She asks. Emmerich, he says. He would be 21 now. He settled near the lowland river towns according to the last intelligence I have, which is 18 months old. She thinks about the river towns. She thinks about the particular texture of life in the lowland settlements. Small, communal, the kind of place where a young man trying to build something quiet and human would find the space to do it. I don't know him, she says. But I know those towns. And I know what it means to leave something you love because staying was costing you pieces of yourself you couldn't afford to keep losing. Kael is very still. Yes, he says quietly. I imagine you do. Warden Soren is a compact man in his late 50s with the specific physical bearing of someone who has spent 4 decades in mountain terrain. Low center of gravity, broad through the shoulders, with weathered hands and eyes that have the permanent slight squint of a person accustomed to reading distance. He comes into the lower study with the careful wariness of a man who does not know precisely what he has walked into. And he stops when he sees that it is not the alpha waiting for him but a young woman in grey robes sitting in one of the study chairs with her hands folded in her lap. He looks around the room. The alpha will join us shortly, she says. Please sit down, Warden Soren. He does not sit down. He looks at her with the evaluating steadiness of a man taking a measurement. You are the Covenant daughter, he says. I am Seraphine Ashveil, she says. Yes. You've been causing considerable disruption, he says. There is no particular judgment in it. It is delivered as information. I've been trying to survive, she says. The disruption is a side effect. Something shifts in his face, minute, but present. He pulls out the chair across from her and sits down. What do you want? He asks. I want to tell you something about the southern lowland river towns, she says. And then I want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly, and then I will tell you why it matters. He looks at her. Go on, he says. The river towns, she says, are not glamorous. They are not powerful. They are small and practical, and they smell like river mud in spring and wood smoke in winter, and they are full of people who chose them specifically because they are the kind of place where a person can build something without it being taken apart by forces they can't control. She pauses. They are the kind of place where a young man who needed to find out who he was outside of what he was born into could do that work quietly and without judgment. Soren's face has gone very still. My question, she says, is this: when you imagine your son's life in those towns, not the leaving, not the law, not the succession, just his life, the daily texture of it, does it look like something you would have chosen for him if you could have chosen anything? A silence that is long and specific and full. That, Soren says finally, his voice carefully controlled, is not a fair question. No, she agrees. It isn't. But it's the true one. He looks at her. His jaw works slightly. He looks at the table. He sends letters, he says, quietly, to the tabletop rather than to her. Every month. Regular as weather. He is well. He has work he cares about. He has, a pause. He has built something. Yes. Then the thing Audriel is holding over you, she says gently, is not actually your son's happiness. It is the gap between what pack law says his choice meant and what you know it actually means. Soren is very quiet. Audriel is going to use you tonight, she says. Whether you vote for his motion or not, he is going to use the fact of his leverage over you to demonstrate to the remaining uncommitted council members that the Alpha cannot protect his own wardens. Either you vote for him and he wins outright, or you refuse and he makes an example of the refusal. You are in a position that has been constructed to be impossible. And you are proposing. I am proposing, she says, that impossible positions occasionally have exits that aren't on the official map. The door opens. Kael comes in. He looks at Soren. He looks at Seraphine. He reads something in the room, in the specific quality of the silence, in the angle of Soren's shoulders, in whatever is in her face, and he crosses to the table and sits down not at the head of it but at the side of it, level with both of them, and says, Soren, Emmerich's succession is guaranteed by Alpha Declaration regardless of compact statute. I should have said this 2 years ago. I didn't because I was waiting for you to ask. That was a failure of judgment on my part, and I'm correcting it now. Soren looks at him. A long moment passes. You're doing this now, Soren says slowly, because you need my vote. I'm doing this now, Kael says, because it should have been done 2 years ago and tonight has made delay impossible. Both things are true simultaneously. Another long silence. Soren looks at Seraphine. You walked into the great hall 3 days ago, he says, and refused to kneel in front of 200 wolves. Yes, she says. And tonight you intend to walk back in. Yes. He looks at her for a long moment with the evaluating steadiness of a man who has spent 40 years reading terrain. My vote, he says slowly, is not for the motion. Something releases in the room, a pressure she had not fully registered until it was gone. And the other 2 uncommitted members, she says. Audriel still needs them. Marin of the Eastern Valley will not move against the Alpha without Soren, Kael says. They have been aligned for 20 years. If Soren holds, Marin holds. And the 7th? The 7th, Kael says carefully, is Marshal Vedrick. She looks at him. The man who delayed your morning briefing. The man, he says, who has survived 4 changes of power in this citadel by being precisely useful to whoever currently needs precision. She thinks about this. Then we need to make sure, she says, that what he needs tonight is to be useful to us. And how do you propose to do that? She looks at Kael. She looks at Soren. She looks at the territorial map on the wall behind them, the 7 territories, the colored cords, the annotated borders of a kingdom that is always renegotiating itself. By making tonight's eclipse into something so conclusive, she says, that being on the wrong side of it becomes the most dangerous thing Vedrick has ever done. He doesn't need convincing. He needs the calculation to change. And you can do that, Kael says. It is not quite a question. She meets his eyes. We can do that, she says. The map room is quiet. The mountain light falls through the narrow windows in cold pale columns. Somewhere in the citadel, in the corridors and the closed session rooms and the shadowed junctions where Audriel's patience waits like a hand around a throat, the day is moving toward evening. The eclipse is coming. And for the first time since she arrived, Seraphine Ashveil does not feel like the smallest piece on the board. She feels like the piece that nobody saw coming. Chapter 7. The moon begins to die at the 8th hour. It does not happen quickly. It is not the sudden extinguishing of a flame. It is slower than that, a patient, incremental consumption, shadow-eating light from one edge with the unhurried certainty of something that has done this before and will do it again and is entirely untroubled by the opinions of anyone watching from below. Seraphine watches it from the window of her chamber. She has been dressed since the 7th hour. Not in the grey robes of arrival. Those she folded and set aside this morning with the specific deliberateness of a person putting down something they will not be picking back up. What she is wearing now is simpler and more considered. Dark wool, fitted, practical. The clothes of a person who intends to move if moving becomes necessary. Her hair is down. She made this decision consciously, standing at the polished metal square that passes for a mirror in this room, and the decision had a specific meaning that she did not fully articulate even to herself but understood nonetheless. She is not dressed for ceremony. She is dressed for what comes after. A knock at the door. Measured. 2 beats, a pause, 1 more. The signal she and Kael established this morning in the map room, in the hour after Soren left and before the day began its final move toward evening. She opens the door. He is dressed in formal pack regalia for the first time since the night of her arrival. The dark ceremonial furs, the Alpha's iron torque at his throat, the territorial markings on his wrists that she has not seen before, revealed now by the formal dress in place of the plain tunics of the last 3 days. He looks like the throne made flesh. He looks like every story ever told about what an Alpha King is supposed to be. He looks at her. His eyes move from her face to her clothes to her unbound hair and back to her face, and something moves through his expression. Not the recalibration of a strategist, not the assessment of an alpha, but something quieter and more personal that he does not attempt to conceal and does not attempt to name. Ready, he says. No, she says. Let's go anyway. The courtyard has been prepared. She smells it before she sees it, pine resin and burning cedar, and beneath that the cold iron smell of the altar itself, white marble dragged from somewhere older than the citadel and set at the center of the flagstones like a statement that predates everything built around it. Torches ring the space in a wide circle, their flames burning the particular red-orange of treated wood, and beyond the torches the pack is assembled. Not 60 this time, not a selected audience, but the full Ironmo pack, every member who can stand and witness, ranked in concentric rings that expand outward from the altar until they reach the citadel walls. 200 sets of glowing amber eyes. And at the front of the innermost ring, in the space between the torchline and the altar, Audriel. He is standing very straight. He is dressed formally, which she notices because it is specific, the formal dress of the beater's household, which is a statement about what he believes tonight to be. Not a ritual. A coronation. His coronation. She can see it in his posture, in the patient, arrived quality of his stillness, the way a man stands who believes he is watching the last steps of a long plan complete themselves. He looks at her as she crosses the courtyard. She looks back at him. She does not look away first. Marshal Vedrick stands to the left of the altar. She looks at him briefly, at the careful arrangement of his expression, the diplomatic blankness of a man who has not yet decided what face to wear tonight, and she thinks, the calculation has to change before the blood hits the stone. Not after. She files this. She keeps walking. Kael takes his position at the altar's head. She takes her position at its foot. The eclipse is perhaps a third consumed. The moon above them a crescent now, the shadow's edge sharp and absolute, the remaining light falling cold and strange across the courtyard in a way that makes the familiar unfamiliar, the known unrecognizable, the ordinary edges of things slightly wrong. It is, she thinks, an entirely appropriate light for what is about to happen. The pack is silent. Kael speaks. The Covenant Protocol, he says, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtyard without apparent effort, is tonight completed under the light of the Ironmo eclipse, as the founding compact prescribes. The pack bears witness. The moon bears witness. What is done here tonight is done in accordance with the law as written. The full law, the founding law, the law that precedes amendment and political convenience and the particular interpretations of those who have confused their ambitions with the compact's intention. A murmur moves through the pack. She catches the quality of it. Not hostility, not the dissatisfied growl of 3 nights ago, but something more complicated. Uncertainty. Attention. The specific quality of a large group of people who are waiting to find out what something means. Audriel's stillness has sharpened. The Covenant daughter will step forward, Kael says. She steps forward. She moves to the side of the white marble altar and she looks at it. The surface of it old and marked by time, by weather, by the accumulated weight of every ritual conducted over it in 300 years of Ironmo history. The stone darkened in its center by what she does not let herself think too carefully about, and she breathes. She looks up at Kael. He is looking at her. His face is the formal face, composed, authoritative, the alpha's face. But his eyes are his own, and in them she finds the thing she is looking for, steadiness. Not reassurance, not comfort, just the specific, grounded steadiness of a man who is exactly where he said he would be. She turns to the pack. She does not reach for Kael's blade. Instead she reaches into the fold of her sleeve and produces the item she placed there this morning, in the library, before the sun had fully cleared the eastern ridge, a single page of parchment, old enough that the edges have gone soft with age, the ink on it faded to the particular brown of 300 years of patience. A copy, in Vila's precise, cramped handwriting. Copied word for word from the founding compact, the original text, the version that predates every amendment the High Matriarch's Council ever introduced. She holds it up. The founding compact, she says, her voice clear and carrying and aimed at every single set of eyes in the circle, states the following. She reads it. Not all of it. Just the relevant passage, the blood-on-stone clause, the covenant completion requirement, the specific and deliberate absence of any language specifying whose blood, which party, which direction the obligation runs. She reads it slowly. She reads it twice. The courtyard is absolutely silent. The compact does not specify, she says, lowering the page, that the blood must come from the covenant daughter. It specifies that blood must meet stone. It specifies that the covenant bond is completed by the offering of life, not the surrender of it, not the submission of it, the offering. She looks at Audriel. I am not here to submit to the Ironmo pack, she says. I am here to offer myself to it. As a partner. As a voice for the lowland territories whose interests have been systematically excluded from this compact for 3 years. As a human who has already paid more than the treaty asked for and who is still standing. She sets the parchment on the altar. She looks at Kael. He produces the ceremonial blade, the heavy, curved steel she has been looking at in her imagination since he described it to her 3 days ago, longer in the reality than she expected, the edge catching the eclipse light and throwing it back in a cold, narrow line. He holds it out, not toward her throat, not toward her submission. Hilt first. She takes it. The pack breathes, a collective sound, 200 lungs moving simultaneously, something between a gasp and a growl that travels through the circle like a wave and breaks against the citadel walls and comes back changed. She turns the blade in her hand. She finds the edge. She looks at Audriel one more time. He has moved, just slightly, just enough, his weight shifting forward onto the balls of his feet with the specific, coiled quality of a man about to speak or strike, his composure cracking at the edges where his patience has run out. "This is not," he begins. "Warden Soren," Seraphine says, still looking at Audriel, her voice carrying over his. "Does the founding compact, as I have read it, accurately reflect the language of the Bloodtie Covenant clause?" A pause. From the inner ring of the pack, Soren steps forward. He stands straight. His voice is deliberate and carries the specific weight of 40 years of pack authority behind it. "It does," he says. Audriel's jaw tightens. "Marshal Vedrick," she says. Every eye in the courtyard moves to Vedrick. He is standing very still beside the altar. The diplomatic blankness of his expression has been replaced by something else, something that is doing rapid, visible calculations. The face of a man who has just watched the calculation change in real time and is processing the implications with the focused urgency of someone who has survived 4 changes of power by being the first to understand which way the wind is moving. She meets his eyes. She holds them. "Marshal Vedrick," she says, quietly now, just for him, just for the distance between them, the founding compact. As record of protocol. As a matter of the law you have administered in this citadel for how many years? 14, he says. His voice is careful, but it is present. In 14 years of protocol administration, she says, have you encountered any formal amendment to the Bloodtie Covenant clause that supersedes the founding text? The courtyard waits. Audriel is very still now. The kind of still that precedes something irreversible. Vedrick looks at the parchment on the altar. He looks at Audriel. He looks at Kael. He looks at Seraphine. And Vedrick, who has survived 4 changes of power in this citadel by understanding, with exquisite precision, which moments are the ones that everything else will be measured against, draws himself up and says, in his best formal voice, the voice trained for making small things sound enormous and enormous things sound inevitable. No formal amendment to the founding covenant clause exists in the Citadel's official record. Audriel moves. He is fast, pack-feist, the speed of something that was born to this, and he crosses the distance between his position and the altar in a fraction of a second, his hand coming down toward the parchment, toward the evidence, toward the thing that has just shifted everything. Kael's hand closes around his wrist. He doesn't wrench. He doesn't throw. He simply holds, and the holding is enough, the absolute, immovable, architectural certainty of it. And Audriel stops. Because you can fight many things, but you cannot fight a wall, and Kael's grip is a wall, and everyone in the courtyard can see it, and the seeing is the entire point. The assembly has heard the founding text, Kael says. His voice is very quiet. Quieter than anything he has said tonight. Quieter than anything she has heard him say in 3 days, and because of that, somehow, the most carrying thing in the courtyard. The assembly has heard the protocol record confirmed. The assembly has heard the Covenant Daughter's declaration. He releases Audriel's wrist. Audriel steps back. His face is a controlled, precise fury. The expression of a man who has been playing a very long game and has just watched a piece he didn't know was on the board take the position he needed. Kael looks at Seraphine. She looks at the blade in her hand. She looks at the white marble altar. She looks at the eclipse above them, the moon almost entirely consumed now, the last silver edge of it narrowing, the shadows' work nearly complete, the sky above the courtyard the deep, specific red-black of totality approaching. She thinks about her mother's cold hands. She thinks about Kael and the eastern fields and the mountains he used to name like friends. She thinks about a record keeper who spent 11 years carrying the weight of a page she was told to copy and finally put a key under a door. She thinks about a man who tended fires and spoke truth in libraries and exhaled on a rampart in the dark like someone setting down something they'd been carrying alone. She presses the blade to her palm. She does not flinch. The cut is clean and sharp and immediate, and the pain of it is real and specific, and she breathes through it. One slow breath, measured, intentional, and she closes her hand and she steps to the altar and she opens it over the white marble stone. Crimson on white. The sound it makes is very small. The effect of it is not. 200 wolves, 200 sets of amber eyes, 200 bodies that have stood in patient, predatory silence around this altar for this moment, go completely, absolutely still. And then, from somewhere in the back of the circle, from one of the older wolves, one of the elders she has not yet been introduced to, comes a sound. It is not a growl. It is not dissatisfied. It is low and resonant, and it rises from a single throat and then from the throat next to it and the throat next to that, spreading outward through the circle the way the growl of 3 nights ago spread, but in the opposite direction. Not threatening, not warning, but something that sounds ancient and formal, and, underneath all of that, something that sounds like recognition. Like a name being spoken in a language older than names. Kael steps to the altar. He looks at her blood on the stone. He looks at her face. He draws his own blade, not the ceremonial one she is holding but a shorter blade, personal, worn at his hip, and before she can speak or move or process what she is watching, he draws it across his own palm. Deliberate, unhesitating. He sets his hand next to hers on the stone. 2 bloods. 1 altar. The compact flows both ways. He says, loudly enough for the courtyard, but his eyes are on her. Only on her. The Alpha King of Ironmoor offers his life to the Covenant daughter. Not as a sovereign to a subject. As a partner to a partner. The resonant sound from the pack swells. Audriel says nothing. He has nothing left to say. The eclipse reaches totality. The moon above them turns the color of old blood, hanging in the black sky like something that has been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment, painting the courtyard and the altar and the 2 bleeding hands on the white stone in a light that is red and ancient and entirely, completely without mercy. It is, she thinks, perfect. The blood has met the stone, Vedrick says, his formal voice rising over the resonance of the pack, over the red dark of the eclipse, over the specific and enormous silence of a moment that has just permanently rearranged everything. The covenant is complete. Both parties bound. By founding law. By Ironmoor law. By the law of blood. He pauses. Let the pack receive its queen. The resonance becomes something else. It becomes a roar. Not hostile. Not challenging. 200 wolves, raising their voices to the blood moon in the oldest sound the Ironmoor pack knows. The sound of recognition, of acceptance, of a name being given to something that has just earned it. Seraphine stands at the white marble altar with her bleeding hand and the eclipse above her and the roar of 200 wolves in the mountain air around her, and she does not tremble, and she does not weep, and she does not look at Audriel. She looks at Kael. He is looking at her. In the red light of the totality, his eyes are not amber. They are darker than that. Warmer. The color of something that has been burning for a long time and has finally found the thing it was burning toward. He reaches across the altar. He takes her bleeding hand in his bleeding hand. He does not speak. He doesn't need to. She holds on. Chapter 8. The roar of the pack takes a long time to leave her body. She can still feel it, even now, in the quiet of the private study, with the eclipse outside fading through its return and the courtyard below emptying of wolves and the citadel settling back into its nighttime registers of boot and stone and distant fire. The roar has left a residue in her chest, a vibration that lives below the range of conscious thought, something that feels less like sound remembered and more like a frequency her body has absorbed and is still deciding what to do with. She sits in the chair nearest the fire. Her hand has been wrapped. One of the pack's healers, a broad woman with efficient hands and the specific wordless authority of someone who has dressed 10,000 wounds without ceremony, had taken her palm between both of hers in the courtyard and worked quickly and well and said nothing throughout except one thing. At the end, standing up and meeting Seraphine's eyes with an expression that carried in it something old and formal and deliberate. Well done, Covenant daughter. She had not known what to do with that. She still doesn't, entirely. She turns it over in her mind now, sitting by the fire, her wrapped hand resting in her lap, the warmth of the room doing its slow, patient work against the cold she carried in from the courtyard. The door opens. Kael comes in. His own hand is wrapped, mirroring hers, right palm, white linen, the same efficient work of the same efficient healer. He has shed the ceremonial furs. He is back in dark wool, sleeves pushed to his elbows, and he looks tired in the specific way that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with the particular exhaustion of holding a great deal of weight very carefully for a very long time and then setting it down. He looks at her. She looks at him. There is a quality to the room that neither of them immediately addresses, a specific atmospheric shift, something that has been building through 3 days of libraries and ramparts and training yards and locked doors, that the eclipse and the altar and the 2 bleeding hands have finally brought to its full pressure. The room is aware of it. They are aware of it. The fire is aware of it. He sits in the chair across from her. He leans forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped, and looks at the fire for a moment before looking back at her. Audrielle has left the Citadel, he says. She absorbs this. Left, she says. Not removed. Not imprisoned. Left. His voice is even. Within an hour of the eclipse conclusion, he gathered his household staff, 8 people, his senior sentinels, his personal records, and rode out through the northern gate. He did not request permission. He did not announce destination. He'll go to the High Matriarch, she says. Yes. He'll regroup there. He still has the 2 territory representatives who voted for his motion. Yes. So tonight didn't end it. No, he says. Tonight changed the shape of it. Ending it will take longer. She nods slowly. She looks at the fire. She thinks about the word longer and what it contains, the months or years of what comes next, the political reconstruction, the treaties to be renegotiated, the 4th page to be formally repudiated in the compact record, the High Matriarch's faction to be dismantled piece by careful piece, and she feels the weight of it, the genuine and unromantic weight of the work ahead, and she does not look away from it. Vedrick, she says, has formally aligned with the Alpha's household as of 1 hour ago, Kael says. He came to me directly after the eclipse. He was. A pause, something that might be dry amusement moving briefly through his voice. Precise about his reasoning. He said the protocol record spoke for itself and he had simply confirmed what the record said. He's not wrong, she says. He's also not wrong that he calculated the room correctly and moved at the right moment, Kael says. I will take the help. I am not required to fully trust the helper. Soren, he says, and his voice carries something warmer, stood in front of the full pack tonight and confirmed the founding text on the record. That cost him something. His relationship with the Beetle-aligned wardens will not survive it. I told him as much afterward. What did he say? He said his son sends letters every month, regular as weather, and that a man who receives letters like that has enough. She is quiet for a moment. Good, she says softly. Yes, he agrees. Good. The fire settles. A log shifts and resettles with a soft, decisive sound. Outside, somewhere on the high ramparts, a sentinel makes his circuit, the slow measured footfall of a man whose job is to look outward at the dark and report back what he finds. You bled, she says. On the altar. That wasn't the plan. No, he agrees. We discussed the founding text. We discussed the blood on stone clause. We discussed my offering. We did not discuss you. No, he says again. We didn't. Why did you do it? He is quiet for a moment. He looks at his wrapped hand. Because, he says, the founding compact says the covenant bond is completed by the offering of life. Not one life. Not the smaller party's life. Life. And it seemed to me, standing at that altar, watching you bleed for a kingdom that has given you very little reason to bleed for it. He stops. He begins again, more carefully. It seemed to me that a bond built on one person's offering and another person's reception is not a partnership. It is still an imbalance with better language. She looks at him. The pack didn't expect it, she says. No, Audrielle didn't expect it. No. Did you expect it? She asks. Before the moment. Did you plan it? A long pause. I knew, he says slowly, that if I stood at that altar and watched you cut your hand and place it on that stone, I would not be able to stand there and do nothing. I knew that before we walked into the courtyard. He pauses again. Whether that constitutes planning or simply knowing yourself well enough to predict your own behavior, I'm not certain there's a meaningful distinction. She looks at him for a long moment. It changed everything, she says. You understand that. The pack receiving a human covenant daughter through the founding text loophole is significant. The Alpha King bleeding on the altar beside her, that is something else entirely. That is not a political maneuver. That is not a strategic recalibration. That is a statement, he says. Yes. I know what it is, he says quietly. I knew what it was when I did it. The fire breathes between them. She uncurls her wrapped hand from her lap and looks at it. The clean white linen, the faint dark stain at the center where the wound is still making itself known through the bandaging. In the lowlands, she says. When I was young, before the eastern fields, before everything, my father used to take us to the river in late summer. Kael and me. There was a place where the current ran fast around a bend, and the safe crossing was a series of flat rocks, and you had to commit to each step before you could see the next one, because the water moved too fast to stand still and assess. You just had to step and then step again and trust that the next rock would be there. She looks up at him. I have been stepping since I arrived in this citadel, she says. Every decision, every conversation, every door I went through without knowing what was on the other side. I kept stepping. Yes, he says. The next rock, she says, is a war, with the High Matriarch's faction, with Audriel in their house, with 2 territory representatives already committed against us and the political reconstruction of a compact that has been quietly corrupted for 3 years. That is what is on the other side of tonight. Yes, he says again. I'm not afraid of it, she says. I know. But I need you to understand, she says, and her voice is very steady, very direct, the voice she uses when she is saying something she has thought about carefully and means completely, that I did not bleed on that altar for the Ironmoor throne. I bled for the lowland families who lost their migration routes. I bled for the treaty houses that were handed 4-page documents they weren't equipped to read. I bled for Kael and the fields that don't exist anymore. The throne is the mechanism. It is not the reason. He looks at her. His expression is open in a way she has not seen it in 3 days of careful, incremental opening. Not the managed openness of the library or the deliberate honesty of the rampart, but something prior to management, something that exists before the decision to show or conceal has been made. I know, he says. That is precisely why the pack roared. She holds his gaze. They roared for you too, she says. They roared for what we made together on that altar, he says. That is different from roaring for either of us separately. And it is. He pauses, and she watches him find the words with the care of a man who understands that some things, once said aloud, cannot be unsaid. It is the first time in 7 years that I have felt the pack roar for something I actually believe in. She is quiet. The weight of that sentence sits in the room like the last stone before the crossing is complete. She stands up. She crosses the small distance between the 2 chairs. She stops in front of him. Close, the firelight between them doing what firelight does in small warm rooms late at night, and she holds out her wrapped hand. He looks at it. He looks up at her face. He takes her hand in his, gently, his thumb resting over the bandaging, not pressing, just present, and the contact moves through her with the specific warmth of something that has been arriving for 3 days and has finally arrived. Tell me about the Iron Moor, she says softly. The real version. You promised. Something breaks open in his face. Simply and completely, the way light breaks through when a door opens in a dark room. Not dramatic, not violent, just suddenly present where it wasn't before. The lower territories, he says, and his voice is different now, lower, quieter, unhurried, the voice of a man speaking about something he loves to someone he trusts. In spring, when the mountain snowmelt comes down through the eastern channels, the valley floor floods for exactly 3 weeks, and the families who live there have been building their houses on stilts for 100 generations because that is simply how spring works, and they have made their peace with it. The children paddle between the houses in flat-bottomed boats. They race each other. She watches his face as he speaks. In the northern reaches, Sorn's territory, there is a forest of black pine that is older than the compact, older than the Citadel, older than the name Iron Moor. The wolves who live near it have a tradition of walking the boundary of it on the winter solstice. The whole community, even the young ones, even the very old. Not for any ritual reason. Just because the forest has been there longer than everything else, and it seems correct to acknowledge that. And here, she says, the Citadel itself. Here, he says, and something shifts in his voice. There is a bakery in the lower level of the East Wing that has been run by the same family for 4 generations. They begin before dawn. The smell of it reaches the upper corridors by the 5th hour. On mornings when everything else in this citadel feels like weight and obligation and the performance of things I would not choose. He pauses. On those mornings, that smell is the thing that reminds me what the wait is for. She is looking at him. Her hand is still in his. That, she says quietly, is what I needed to know. Why? Because, she says, you can fight for an institution and lose the thread of why you started. I have watched men do it. They begin fighting for the people and end up fighting for the symbol of the people, and the symbol and the people stop being the same thing, and they don't notice when it happens. She pauses. You haven't lost the thread. He is looking at her with an expression she now has a name for. It is the expression of a man who has been carrying something alone for so long that the offer of company has briefly undone him, not broken him, not weakened him, but simply moved something that has been fixed in place for a very long time. Seraphine, he says. Yes. When this is over, the war with Audriel, the High Matriarch's faction, the compact reconstruction, all of it, when there is a morning on the other side of all of it. He stops. He looks at their joined hands. Ask me again, he says quietly. What you asked me tonight. Tell me to tell you about the Iron Moor. Why? Because tonight I am still inside all of it. The eclipse, the altar, the politics of what comes next. And I want to tell you about it on a morning when none of that is present. When it is just the telling and the listening. She looks at him. All right, she says. All right, he agrees. Neither of them moves. The fire burns low and steady and warm. Outside the window the eclipse has fully passed. The moon returned to itself, its ordinary silver light falling through the glass in clean, unmarked bars across the stone floor. The citadel breathes around them, guards on their circuits. The wind in the mountain passes, the distant low sound of the pack settling into its nighttime registers. And then she notices something. The bakery, she says. Yes. You said the smell reaches the upper corridors by the 5th hour. Yes. What hour is it now? He tilts his head. He listens to the citadel the way a person listens to something they know very well. The 4th, he says. Perhaps just past. Then we have an hour, she says. An hour, he agrees, and something in his voice has the specific quality of a man who is going to remember this hour for a very long time. They sit by the fire. They do not discuss strategy. They do not discuss Audriel or the High Matriarch or the 2 territory representatives or the long work of the war ahead. They sit in the warm, firelit quiet of a room that has been the site of many consequential conversations tonight and is now being asked simply to be a room. And they let it, and the letting is its own kind of consequence. She does not fall asleep. But somewhere in the 4th hour, with her hand still loosely in his and the fire doing its slow patient work and the mountain breathing cold and enormous outside the walls, she becomes aware that the part of her that has been braced since the convoy left the lowlands, the constant, low-level tension of a person who has been ready for the next blow since before the last one landed, has quietly, incrementally, without announcement, let go. She sits with this discovery. She does not examine it too closely. Some things are better received than analyzed. At the 5th hour, exactly as promised, something warm and yeasty and deeply human begins its slow patient rise through the corridors of the Iron Moor citadel. Bread, and the smell of bread, the smell of a family 4 generations deep doing the thing they do before the world is fully awake, feeding the citadel the way the citadel has never once said thank you for. She looks at him. He is already looking at her. There, he says quietly. There, she agrees. And outside, beyond the walls, beyond the dark mountain and the past eclipse and the road leading north to where Audriel is riding toward the next version of the war, beyond all of that, in the enormous, patient, indifferent dark, the first suggestion of dawn begins its slow negotiations with the eastern horizon. Chapter 9. Not in the dark, which would have been tactically smarter and is therefore the first thing she notices, the deliberateness of the timing, the choice of dawn over midnight, the specific message encoded in the hour. This is not a raid. This is not a siege conducted in the language of desperation. This is an arrival conducted in the language of certainty, of a force that does not feel the need to use darkness because darkness implies doubt. And whatever is riding toward the northern gate of the Iron Moor citadel as the eastern horizon turns from black to the particular bruised grey of early mountain morning, it does not doubt itself. She is on the upper ramparts when the first sentinel calls it in. She has been there since the 5th hour, since the bread smell reached the upper corridors and she and Kael sat with it for a while in the private study and then, without discussing it, both stood and moved by unspoken agreement toward the parts of the citadel that face north. As though they both knew, in the wordless way that the night had made possible between them, that the morning would not be quiet. She watches the riders come down the mountain road. She counts. She gets to 40 before she stops counting individual riders and starts counting formations, tight, disciplined, the movement of people who have trained together and know each other's rhythms, and behind the riders, broader and slower, the particular dark mass of a ground force moving at march pace through the last of the mountain dark. 200, says a voice beside her. She turns. Vila is standing at the rampart wall 3 feet to her left. She is wearing a heavy wool cloak over what appears to be the same clothes she was wearing yesterday, and she is holding a small leather-bound ledger against her chest the way other people hold shields, and she is looking at the approaching force with the expression of a woman doing a very rapid and very unhappy inventory. 200, Seraphine confirms. Plus the riders. 40, perhaps more. The High Matriarch's household guard numbers 80, Vila says. The remainder will be the Betuline territorial forces. Audriel will have called in every obligation, every promise, every favor accumulated over 3 years of patient coalition building. A pause. He has been preparing this for longer than we knew. How long? The territorial movement orders were pre-signed, Vila says. I found the copies in the Beta household records this morning when the household was cleared out. Pre-signed, predated, prepared and waiting for the moment the eclipse either gave him what he needed or failed to. She opens the ledger briefly, then closes it. He had 2 plans. One where the eclipse worked in his favor. One where it didn't. He has been running both simultaneously for 6 months. Seraphine looks at the force on the mountain road. He is very thorough, she says. He is. Vila agrees. It is his best quality and, tonight, his most dangerous one. What does he want? She says. Specifically, what is the demand? Formal challenge, Vila says. He will invoke the right of Beta challenge under the founding compact, the provision that allows a Beta to formally contest Alpha authority if he can demonstrate a breach of pack law and produce a majority of senior pack members in support. He doesn't have a majority. Last night he had 4 of 7, Vila says. The 2 territory representatives who already committed to him are in that formation on the mountain road. Audriel himself counts as the 3rd vote by compact tradition. He needs only 1 more to meet the threshold. Soren won't move. No. Marin follows Soren. Yes. Then the 7th vote is Vedrick, Seraphine says. Yes, Vila says. It is always, in the end, Vedrick. Kael is already there when she arrives. He is standing at the central table with 3 of his senior war council, names she has learned over the last 3 days, faces she has been filing. Brennan, the Citadel's head of military operations, compact and precise and perpetually unhappy in the specific way of men who are very good at their jobs and find the world insufficiently organized. Lyra, the territorial communications officer, young, fast-thinking, with the kind of mind that processes variables the way other people breathe. And Soren, who has apparently been awake since before the eclipse and shows no sign of considering sleep a current priority. Kael looks up when she enters. His expression tells her he already knows. 200, she says. Plus 40 riders. Audriel and the High Matriarch's household guard combined with Betuline territorial forces. Our count is 230, Brennan says. Without looking up from the territorial map, he is annotating with the focused unhappiness of a man confirming his worst projections. They are 3 miles from the northern gate. At march pace, 40 minutes. Formal challenge, Kael says. It is not a question. Formal challenge, she confirms. He nods. He looks at the map. Our defensive position, Brennan says, is strong. The Citadel was built for exactly this kind of confrontation. The northern approach is a choke point. The gate can hold against a force 3 times this size indefinitely. If we sit behind the walls, they cannot take this Citadel by force. But, Soren says. But, Brennan agrees, with the tone of a man who resents the existence of buts. A formal Beta challenge under the founding compact cannot be heard inside the walls. It must be heard in open ground, before the full pack, with both parties present. If the Alpha refuses to come out and hear the challenge, the compact reads the refusal as an admission of the breach claimed. So we have to open the gate, Lyra says. We have to open the gate, Brennan confirms. The war room is quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of people absorbing the precise dimensions of a box they are standing in. Seraphine looks at the territorial map. She looks at the northern approach, the choke point, the gate, the road that comes down from the High Matriarch's holdings through the mountain pass and arrives at the Citadel's most defensible face. She looks at the space between the gate and the open ground where the challenge must be heard. She looks at Kael. How many of the pack are in the Citadel right now? She asks. Of the full Iron Moor. Lyra says. Perhaps 160. The remainder are in the lower territories, too far to reach before the 40 minutes are up. 160, she says. Against 230. Yes, Brennan says. And Audriel's formal challenge, when it is heard, who rules on it? The senior pack assembly, Soren says. The same 7 who voted last night. Then the force outside the gate is theatre, she says. It is a demonstration. He is showing us the size of his backing to put pressure on Vedrik before the assembly votes. A pause. Yes, Kael says slowly. That is what it is. Then the battle is not at the gate, she says. The battle is Vedrik. Again. Everyone in the room looks at her. He calculated correctly last night, she says. He moved at the right moment and aligned with us, and he has spent the hours since calculating whether that alignment will hold when 230 soldiers appear on the mountain road at dawn. She pauses. He is somewhere in this citadel right now, and he is running the numbers, and the question is what the numbers show him. The numbers, Brennan says flatly, show him 230 outside the gate and 160 inside it. The numbers, she says, also show him a founding compact that was confirmed on the record last night by his own formal declaration. They show him a covenant bond completed under founding law with the full pack as witness. They show him that any vote he casts in support of Audriel's challenge this morning is a vote against a protocol record that he himself certified. She pauses. Vedrik has survived 4 changes of power in this citadel. He has survived them by being correct about which side of history he is standing on. We need him to understand, before that assembly is called, that last night was not a moment he can walk back from. And if he calculates differently? Soren asks. Then we make sure he doesn't, she says. Where is he? Vedrik is in the protocol chamber. Of course he is. The protocol chamber, the formal record room adjacent to the main hall, where every compact amendment, every assembly ruling, every formal declaration in the history of the Ironmoor Citadel is archived in floor-to-ceiling shelves of oilskin-wrapped volumes, is exactly where a man who has survived 4 changes of power by being useful would go when the 5th change of power is 3 miles up the mountain road. He is standing at one of the shelves when she enters. He does not startle. He turns with the careful composure of a man who has been expecting someone to come through this door and has spent the intervening time deciding how to be when they do. He looks at her. She looks at him. They are 40 minutes away, she says. I know, he says. He needs your vote, she says. I know. He has sent a message already, hasn't he, she says. It is not a question. A pause. A rider came ahead of the formation, Vedrik says carefully. 20 minutes ago. The message was an invitation to reconsider last night's protocol confirmation in light of new evidence regarding compact law. New evidence, she says. He claims to have a formal legal opinion from the High Matriarch's compact scholars arguing that the founding text I confirmed last night has been superseded by later amendment and that my confirmation was therefore procedurally invalid. Does he? He does. She crosses the room. She goes to the shelves. She looks at the volumes, decades and decades of them, the accumulated record of a kingdom administering itself, generation after generation of record keepers copying and filing and preserving. Which one, she says, is the original founding compact? A long pause. Then Vedrik crosses the room and stands beside her and reaches up, 3rd shelf from the top, far left, an oilskin-wrapped volume that looks identical to 50 others except for a small mark on the spine that she would not have known to look for, and takes it down. He holds it. He looks at it. I have administered the protocol record of this citadel for 14 years, he says. I received it from my predecessor, who received it from his. The founding compact in my hands is the founding compact. The High Matriarch's scholars can produce any opinion they like. It does not change what this document says. I know that, she says quietly. Do you? He looks at her. What I know, he says, is that there are 230 soldiers on the mountain road. Yes. And 160 wolves in this citadel. Yes. Those are significant numbers. They are, she agrees. And in 6 months, when the war is over and the High Matriarch's faction has been dismantled and the compact has been formally restored from the founding text, and it will be Vedrik, because the law is on our side and the record is on our side and last night was witnessed by the full Ironmoor pack and cannot be unwound. When all of that has happened, those numbers will be a footnote. She pauses. But your declaration last night will be the first line. He looks at her. She looks back at him with the steadiness of someone who is not performing steadiness but simply has it, the specific, grounded, unhurried quality of a person who has stepped on every rock in the crossing and knows the next one will be there. The Alpha, she says quietly, bled on the altar last night. Not because the compact required it. Not because the strategy required it. Because he believed the bond should flow both ways. She pauses. A man who bleeds voluntarily for a principle is not a man who loses. He is a man who has decided what he is willing to pay, which means he has decided he is willing to pay it, which means the war ahead does not frighten him the way it frightens people who haven't made that decision yet. Vedrik is very still. You are asking me, he says slowly, to stand in front of 230 soldiers and confirm last night's protocol record. I am asking you, she says, to stand in front of 230 soldiers and be the person you were last night. That person already made the decision. I am simply asking you not to unmake it. A long silence. The protocol chamber breathes around them, old paper and older stone and the weight of 14 years of careful, surviving neutrality. Vedrik looks at the founding compact in his hands. He looks at the shelves. He looks at her. The High Matriarch's legal opinion, he says finally, in his most formal voice, the voice trained for making small things sound enormous and enormous things sound inevitable, is not entered in the Citadel's official record and therefore has no standing in the formal protocol. The founding compact as confirmed last night stands. She breathes. Thank you, Vedrik. Don't thank me, he says, with a dryness that sounds, briefly, almost like Vila. Win. That appears to be the standard. They open the gate at the 30-minute mark. Not because they have to. They could have waited the full 40, could have used the time. But Kael makes the decision to open early and she understands it immediately. Waiting is the posture of a defensive position, and a defensive position concedes something about who is on which side of the moral geography of this confrontation. Opening early is the posture of a court that has nothing to apologize for. She stands at Kael's right as the gates swing open. She has thought, briefly, about whether to stand beside him or behind him or elsewhere entirely. Whether her position will be read as presumption, as overreach, as a human woman inserting herself into pack business she has not yet fully earned the right to stand at the center of. She has decided she does not care. She is the covenant daughter of the Iron pack under the founding compact. She bled on that altar. The pack roared. She stands where she stands. Audriel rides through the gate at the head of his formation. He looks different in daylight with an army behind him. More settled into what he is, the patience and the cold amber eyes and the long game of a man who has been building toward this for 3 years given full expression, no longer needing to occupy the careful subordinate position of a beater in a court he intends to take. He looks, she thinks, like a man who believes the next 10 minutes are a formality. He looks at Kael. He looks at Seraphine. Something moves through his expression when he looks at her. Not surprise, not anger, but a kind of cold, focused recalibration. The expression of a chess player who has found an unexpected piece on the board and is deciding how to manage it. Alpha, he says. I invoke the right of formal beta challenge under the founding compact. I submit that the Covenant Protocol was completed last night in violation of established compact law, and that the Alpha's conduct in the matter of the Covenant daughter constitutes a breach of Alpha authority sufficient to warrant a contested leadership vote. His voice is formal and carries and is perfectly calibrated for the assembled pack who have gathered in the open ground behind the gate, the 160 wolves of the Ironmoor Citadel, ranged in the morning light with their amber eyes and their silence and the specific, complex quality of a group of people watching something that will define them. Your grounds, Kael says. Audriel produces a document, a formal legal opinion from the High Matriarch's compact scholars. He says, confirming that the founding text invoked last night has been superseded by compact amendment and that the protocol confirmation issued by Marshal Vedrik is therefore procedurally void. He holds it out. Marshal Vedrik, Kael says. Vedrik steps forward from his position at Kael's left. He is holding the founding compact. He holds it up, the oilskin-wrapped volume, 300 years old, the original text in the original hand, and he speaks in his best formal voice, the voice trained for exactly this, for making small things sound enormous and enormous things sound inevitable, for filling open ground with the weight of institutional authority. The founding compact as held in the Citadel's official protocol record supersedes all subsequent opinion on matters of original covenant law. The protocol confirmation issued last night reflects the founding text as recorded and has not been amended by any instrument held in the official record. The confirmation stands. He pauses. The High Matriarch's legal opinion is not held in the Citadel's official record. It has no standing. Audriel's jaw tightens. The assembly vote, he begins, has been called, Soren says, stepping forward from the pack. Senior Assembly, present and standing. 7 members. He looks around the open ground. The vote on whether the formal challenge has legal standing will proceed. The 7 senior pack members step forward. She watches them, their faces, their postures, the specific quality of each body as it takes its position in the assembly circle. She has spent 3 days learning to read this pack the way her father taught her to read terrain. Not the surface of it but the shape underneath, the geology of it, where the solid ground is and where the soft places are. 2 for Audriel. Declared, committed, standing with their bodies angled toward him. Soin. Steady, facing forward. Marin, beside Soin, following as she has followed for 20 years. The 2 remaining uncommitted members. She has spoken to neither of them directly, has had no opportunity, has had to trust that the eclipse and the roar and the morning's events have done the work she could not do personally. She watches their faces. And then Vedrick steps into the assembly circle. He stands. He faces forward. And that is the vote. 5-2. The challenge does not have legal standing. The silence that follows is the specific silence of a very long game reaching its end. Not a dramatic silence, not the held breath of a crowd awaiting a verdict, but something more final than that, the silence of a conclusion that has arrived so completely that the room hasn't yet found the language to move past it. Audriel sits on his horse in the morning light and looks at the assembly circle and does not speak. The High Matriarch's household guard behind him is still. The Beetle-aligned territorial forces are still. 230 people who rode through the mountain dark to be present at a coronation are standing in the courtyard of a citadel that did not go the way they planned, and the stillness of them is the stillness of that specific and particular recalibration. The challenge has no standing, Kael says. His voice is even, not triumphant. She notices this, the specific absence of triumph, the deliberate choice to state the fact without the editorial, and she understands it as strategy and also as character and cannot entirely separate the two, which she suspects is exactly the point. The Beta's formal challenge has failed under assembly vote, Kael continues. Under the founding compact, a failed formal challenge requires the challenger to either formally submit to Alpha authority or formally withdraw from the territory. He looks at Audriel. I am giving you the choice, he says. Formally, in front of the full assembly and your own forces. Submit or withdraw. I will not make that decision for you. Audriel looks at him. Something moves through his face. Complex, layered, the expression of a man confronting the gap between what he planned and what has happened, which is a gap that has been building for 3 days and has arrived, this morning, at its full width. You should have let her kneel, Audriel says. His voice is quiet, controlled. The fury in it is very far beneath the surface. One girl, one moment. Everything would have been simple. Yes, Kael says. It would have been. That's precisely why she didn't. Audriel looks at Seraphine. She looks back at him. She does not speak. She does not need to. The morning light and the open gate and the 5-2 vote and the founding compact in Vedrick's hands and Kael standing beside her with his wrapped hand and the roar of last night still living in the stones of this courtyard. All of that is already speaking, and it is saying everything that needs to be said. Audriel turns his horse. He does not formally submit. He rides back through the gate. His force follows, the household guard, the territorial soldiers, the whole patient architecture of 3 years of coalition building riding back up the mountain road in the morning light. And she watches them go and she notices that she feels none of the things she expected to feel at this moment. Not relief, precisely. Not triumph. Something quieter than either. Something that feels less like winning and more like the first morning of something. The particular quality of a changed world that hasn't yet been named, that is waiting for the people standing in it to decide what to call it. She feels Kael's hand at her back. Not grasping, not directing, just present, his palm warm between her shoulder blades, a point of contact that asks nothing and offers everything, the specific warmth of a person who has decided where they stand. She stands in the open gate of the Ironmoor Citadel and watches Audriel's formation disappear around the bend of the mountain road, and she breathes the cold morning air, and she thinks, not over. She knows it isn't over. She knows Audriel will reach the High Matriarch's holdings by nightfall and the legal challenge will be reformulated and the war ahead is exactly as long and difficult as it has always been and nothing that happened this morning has shortened it by more than a fraction. But, she turns to the pack. 160 wolves in the morning light, the full Ironmoor, assembled, amber-eyed, watching her with the specific, weighted attention of a group of people who have spent 3 days deciding what she is and have, in the last 12 hours, arrived at a conclusion. She looks at them, and one of them, from the back of the assembly, an elder she has not met, a woman with white hair and amber eyes that have seen more changes of power than Vedrick and are considerably less impressed by all of them, lifts her chin. "Covenant daughter," she says. Not in Vedrick's formal voice. Not in the resonant ancient language tone of last night's roar. Just a person, speaking a title to another person, in the morning light, with the simple and complete authority of someone who has decided it is true. Something moves through the pack. And then, from the front of the assembly, from the youngest wolves, from the ones who were children when Kael took the throne and have grown up inside the weight of everything he has carried, the sound begins again. Not the formal roar of the eclipse. Quieter than that. More personal. Her name. Just her name, moving through the assembly from mouth to mouth, from throat to throat, picked up and carried the way a song gets carried when people know it well enough to sing it without being told to. Not in unison, not in the formal resonance of ritual, but in the organic, unstoppable way that true things travel through a community that has decided to receive them. Seraphine. 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 She stands in the gate of the ironmost citadel with Kael's hand warm at her back and the cold mountain mourning around her and her name in 160 mouths, and she breathes. She breathes. And she thinks about her mother's cold hands pressing against her face on the last morning in the lowlands. She thinks about Kael and the mountains he used to name like friends. She thinks, I will write him a letter today. I will tell him about the stilted houses in the lower territories and the black pine forest and the bakery at the 5th hour. And I will tell him the mountains here have names too, and I have been learning them. She thinks, I will tell him the door was not a wall. She thinks, I will tell him I kept stepping. Chapter 10. She writes the letter to Kael before the 6th hour. She does it at the small desk beneath the narrow window, with the mountain light coming in clean and cold and unhurried across the page. And she writes it the way she does everything now, without preamble, without softening, every important thing in the order of its importance. She tells him she is well. She tells him about the stilted houses in the lower territories and the black pine forest in the north that is older than the compact and older than the citadel and older than the name Ironmoor, and the family in the East Wing bakery who have been feeding this citadel for 4 generations without ever being thanked for it. She tells him the mountains here have names. She tells him she has been learning them. She does not tell him about the altar, or the eclipse, or the blade, or the blood. Those things are true and she will tell him eventually, when she can tell them in the past tense, when they have become the beginning of a story rather than the interior of one. Kael is 15 and he still believes the world is a place where things work out, and she has decided, after considerable thought, that she will not be the person who takes that from him before time does it naturally. She tells him instead, the door was not a wall. I kept stepping. The next rock was always there. She folds the letter. She seals it with the small plain seal she has been carrying in her boot since the lowlands. The Ashveil crest, modest and old, the sigil of a family that has lost its fields and its eastern reaches and its winter roots and has not, despite considerable effort by multiple parties, lost its daughter. She sets it on the desk. She sits for a moment with her hands flat on the surface and the morning around her and the particular quality of a day that has not yet decided what it is. The first morning in 5 days that has not arrived carrying something it needed from her immediately, some crisis or confrontation or calculation that required her full and urgent attention before she had fully finished waking up. She breathes. It is, she discovers, an unexpectedly complicated thing to do, to simply breathe, in a quiet room, on a morning that is asking nothing, when you have spent the last 5 days being a person from whom everything was perpetually being required. The body takes a moment to believe it. The mind takes longer. She lets it. She sits with the quiet and the morning light and the letter to her brother and the particular strange weightlessness of a day that begins without emergency, and she lets it be what it is for as long as it lasts. Then she puts her boots on. She goes to find Kael. She finds him not in the map room or the war room or the private study or the training yard, which are the 4 places she has learned to look. She finds him in the lower eastern courtyard. It is a part of the citadel she has not been to before, small, south-facing, sheltered on 3 sides by the citadel walls and open on the 4th to a view of the lower valley that catches the morning sun in a way that the upper ramparts, for all their grandeur, do not. There is a bench of worn granite along the south wall and a single tree. She does not know what kind, only that it is old and has been here long enough to have cracked the flagstones around its base with patient, incremental insistence. Kael is sitting on the bench. He is not doing anything. This is so thoroughly unlike every version of him she has encountered in 5 days. The man in perpetual motion, perpetual management, perpetual performance of one kind or another, that she stops in the courtyard entrance and simply looks at him for a moment. He is sitting with his forearms on his knees and his face turned up toward the morning sun with his eyes closed, and the expression on his face is the most unguarded thing she has seen on it yet, more unguarded than the rampart, more unguarded than the library, more unguarded than the altar, because all of those moments had urgency in them, had the next thing pressing in at the edges. This has nothing pressing in at the edges. This is just a man, sitting in a patch of morning sun, being briefly no one in particular. He opens his eyes. He looks at her. He does not look startled. He does not immediately reassemble the alpha's face. He looks at her with a quietness that matches the courtyard and the morning and the bench and the cracked flagstones and the old tree, like a man who has arrived somewhere and recognizes it and is not in a hurry to leave. "I was wondering when you'd find this one," he says. "You knew I'd look," she says. "You have been systematically mapping this citadel since your first morning," he says. "I estimated you had 3 or 4 corridors left." She crosses the courtyard. She sits on the bench beside him. Not at the far end, not at the careful, maintained distance of the last 5 days, the distance of 2 people who have been perpetually aware of each other and perpetually busy about it. She sits close enough that their shoulders are nearly touching, close enough that the warmth of him is present and specific, and she does this without making a production of it, without it being a statement, because it does not feel like a statement. It feels like a simple and obvious thing that has been waiting for a morning with enough quiet to let it happen. He does not move away. They sit in the morning sun. The valley below the open courtyard wall is coming into itself, the mountain light moving down through the upper peaks and spreading across the lower slopes in the slow, patient way of early hours, filling the shadow valleys with gold and leaving the high places to their own cool blue for a little longer. Somewhere below them, invisible from this height, the lower territory settlements are waking up, the stilted houses, the families, the children who will paddle between the houses when the spring floods come. "It's over," she says. Not a question, not a statement of certainty. The tone of someone who is testing a word to see how it sits. "This part of it," he says. "Yes," she agrees. "This part." A comfortable silence. The tree's shadow moves slightly as the sun climbs. A bird. She does not know the mountain birds yet. This is one of 100 things she does not know yet. Lands briefly in the upper branches and departs with the efficient purposefulness of a creature that has somewhere specific to be. "You promised me something," she says. He turns his head to look at her. "I promised you several things," he says. "You will need to be specific." "You promised me," she says, "that when there was a morning on the other side of all of it, when the eclipse was done and the pack had decided what it had decided and none of it was present, you would tell me about the Iron Moor, the real version." He is quiet for a moment. She watches him, the specific quality of his stillness, the way he is taking the question seriously, giving it the weight it asked for rather than the weight that is convenient. "It is," he says slowly, "a kingdom that has been afraid for a long time." She waits. "Not of external things," he says. "Not of other packs or territorial disputes or the political maneuvering of high matriarchs. Afraid of itself, of its own capacity for the kind of leadership my father practiced. The hand around the throat, the held thing, the management of people through their loves rather than through any genuine bond." He pauses. The pack is strong, extraordinarily strong. But strength without trust is a loaded weapon in a house full of children. It is dangerous to everyone, including the person holding it. "And now," she says. "Now," he says, "the pack roared for something it chose. Not something it was compelled toward by fear or hierarchy or the threat of consequence. It roared because a girl from the lowlands bled on an altar and offered herself to it as a partner, and it recognized the offering as true." He pauses again, and the pause is the kind that has something in it, the kind that is choosing its words not for precision but for honesty, which is a different kind of precision. "And it roared because the alpha bled beside her, and the pack understood what that meant. Not strategically, not politically, just what it meant." "What did it mean?" she asks quietly. He looks at her. "That the kingdom is worth bleeding for," he says. "Not the throne. The kingdom. The stilted houses and the black pine forest and the bakery at the 5th hour and the 15-year-old boy in the river towns who sends letters regular as weather. All of it. Worth bleeding for." She is looking at him. The morning light falls across his face and makes the scar less severe and his eyes warmer, and the geography of him, which she has been reading since she walked into the great hall 5 nights ago, which she has been translating from the language of threat into the language of person, slowly, page by careful page, looks, in this specific light, like some way she could learn. Ask me something true, he says. It is what she said to him in the library, on the 3rd day, when she wanted to know if the man in the hall and the man in the quiet rooms were the same man. He has turned it back to her now, and the turning is deliberate, and she knows what he is asking. She considers it with the seriousness it deserves. Are you happy? She asks. This morning. Not the strategy of the morning or the position of the morning or what the morning means for the war ahead. Just, are you happy? He is very still. She watches him receive the question, watches it move through his expression the way things move through deep water, slowly and completely, reaching everything. I don't know if I know what that is, he says finally. I'm not certain I've had enough practice with it to identify it reliably. Then describe what you have, she says. He looks at the valley. He looks at the tree. He looks at his hands, the wrapped right palm, the bandaging clean now, the wound beneath it doing its slow competent work of closing. I have, he says carefully, a morning, with no emergency in it, and a person beside me who has been, in 5 days, the most consistently surprising thing in a citadel I have lived in for 7 years, and a kingdom that roared last night for something true, and the particular smell of bread that is going to reach this courtyard in approximately. He pauses. They both wait. And then, drifting up from the east wing on the morning air, warm and yeasty and specifically, stubbornly, beautifully human in the middle of all this stone and cold and ancient pack law. Bread. Now, he says. She laughs. It is the first time she has laughed in this citadel, the first time in longer than that, if she is honest, which she generally is. It comes up without planning and without permission, genuine and unguarded and slightly surprised at itself, and she feels it move through her chest in the space where the tension used to be, the space that let go in the small hours of last night and has been quietly rearranging itself since. He looks at her when she laughs. His expression is not the alpha's expression or the strategist's expression or the carefully managed expression of a man performing authority. It is the expression of a person watching something they did not know they needed until it arrived, open and specific, and entirely unprepared to be anything other than what it is. There, she says, when the laugh has settled. That's what you have. Yes, he says quietly. That's what I have. The bread smell deepens. The morning light strengthens. The valley below fills in gold. She reaches out. She takes his unwrapped hand. The left, the one that didn't bleed, the one that has no bandaging between her palm and his, and she holds it the way she has been holding things in this citadel, firmly, deliberately, with the full intention of not letting go. He looks down at their hands. He looks up at her face. He turns his hand in hers and holds back with the same deliberateness, the same intention, the thumb of his free hand moving once, just briefly, across the back of her knuckles, the way you touch something you want to confirm is real. The war, she says. When it comes, he agrees. We fight it together. We fight it together. And when it's over, he says, and something in his voice is a door opening. I will show you the lower territories in spring, the flooding, the boats, the children racing between the houses, and the black pine forest, she says, and the black pine forest. And you'll introduce me to the bakery family. I'll introduce you to the bakery family, he says, and I suspect they will like you considerably more than they like me, and I have made peace with that. How long have you been making peace with that? Since approximately the 2nd morning, he says. When you went to the training yard before I did. She looks at him. You were watching. I was assessing, he says, with the specific quality of a man drawing a distinction he knows is not entirely sustainable. You were watching, she says again, and the smile is in her voice now, unhidden. I was watching, he concedes. She looks at the valley. She thinks about Cassiel's letter on the desk in her chamber, sealed and waiting. She thinks about the road south through the mountain pass, the same road she came in on, 5 days and several lifetimes ago, in the gray ceremonial robes of arrival that she has folded and set aside and does not intend to pick back up. She thinks about her mother's cold hands pressing against her face. Walk like you are going somewhere you chose. She looks at the courtyard, the old tree, the cracked flagstones, the south-facing wall catching the morning sun, this small and specific and unheroic corner of an ancient citadel that smells like stone and pine and bread and, underneath all of it, like something she does not have a word for yet but is beginning to recognize. I chose this, she says quietly. Not to him, exactly. To herself, to the morning, to the version of herself that walked down that convoy road in the grey robes wondering if courage could still be courage when it was the only option left. I chose this. Kael is quiet beside her. Then, Seraphine. Yes. I need to tell you something. She turns to look at him. His expression is serious. Not the formal serious of the hall or the careful serious of the library, but the personal kind, the kind that precedes something that has been held for a while and is being set down. I sent a message to the river towns, he says. 2 days ago, before the eclipse. I sent it through our fastest rider. She is very still. To Kael, he says. I told him his sister was in the ironmost citadel and that she was well and that she was. I told him she was the most formidable person I had encountered in 7 years of running a kingdom, and that he should be informed of this in case it was not already obvious, and that if he wished to visit the citadel at any point the northern road would be open to him and he would be received as family. She looks at him. She does not speak for a long moment. You did that before the eclipse, she says. Yes. Before you knew how it would go. Yes. Why? He looks at her steadily. Because, he says, you told me about a 15-year-old boy who didn't understand why his sister was leaving, and who you didn't have time to explain it to properly, and who was in the river towns wondering. And it seemed to me that a person going into an eclipse altar with the kind of courage you were carrying deserved to know that someone had taken care of that particular wondering. She is looking at him. The morning light is very clear. The bread smell is very warm. His hand is very steady in hers. She thinks about a man who tends fires and speaks truth in libraries and sends riders to river towns before eclipses. Not strategically, not as a move in any game, but simply because a 15-year-old boy was wondering about his sister, and wondering is a weight and he knew how to lift it. She leans forward. She presses her forehead against his jaw. Not a kiss, not yet, something prior to a kiss and in some ways more intimate, the simplest possible form of one person resting against another, the physical language of I am here and you are real and this is solid ground. He goes very still. And then, slowly, with the unhurried certainty of something that has known the direction it was going for several days and has finally arrived at its destination, he turns his head and presses his lips to her hair. Just that. Just her forehead against his jaw and his lips against her hair, and their hands still joined in the morning light. The bread smell in the air and the mountain valley below them going gold and the old tree making its slow, patient argument against the flagstones. She says nothing. He says nothing. Some things do not need a sentence. They sit in the small courtyard until the 7th hour, when Lyra appears at the entrance with the expression of a woman who has been trying to decide for 20 minutes how long to wait before interrupting and has arrived at her limit. The High Matriarch has sent a formal diplomatic envoy, Lyra says, her voice carefully neutral in the manner of someone delivering news they are not personally responsible for. They arrived at the southern gate at the 6th hour. They are requesting an audience. Kael looks at Seraphine. She looks at him. Already, she says. She is thorough, he says. Like her beta. What does a formal diplomatic envoy mean? It means, he says, standing, that she is not ready to go to open war. It means she wants to negotiate. Which means she thinks she still has leverage. Yes. Does she? He looks at her, at the morning light and the courtyard and their joined hands and whatever is in her face that makes him look at her the way he looks at her, and something moves through his expression that is not quite a smile and not quite certainty but is. Something that lives between them, something that has been building for 5 days and has arrived, this morning, at its full and unambiguous shape. Less than she did yesterday, he says. She stands. She straightens. She squares her shoulders with the particular set that she has been developing since she walked into the great hall 5 nights ago. Not the bracing of someone who expects a blow, but the grounding of someone who has decided where they stand and intends to keep standing there. Then we should go, she says, and make sure she understands that. She starts toward the courtyard entrance. She stops. She turns back. Kael. He is looking at her. When this is over, she says. The High Matriarch, the diplomatic envoy, the formal negotiation, the long work of the war ahead, all of it. Yes, he says. The spring floods in the lower territories, she says. The children in the boats. Yes. I want to see that. He looks at her, and for the first time in 5 days, in all the halls and libraries and training yards and ramparts and studies and altars and courtyards and every space in which she has watched this man perform authority and set down authority and carry weight and set down weight and be a title and be a person and be, finally, in the small hours and the morning light, simply himself. For the first time in all of that, Kael of the Black Range, Alpha King of Iron Moor, sovereign of the 7-pack territories, voice of the ancient compact, smiles, fully, completely, without management or strategy or the careful calibration of a man deciding what to show. Just a smile, real and unhurried and slightly undone at the edges in the way that real things are. The smile of a person who has been carrying a great deal for a very long time and has found, on an ordinary morning in a small south-facing courtyard, something worth setting it down for. "I'll take you there myself," he says. She turns and walks toward the corridor, and Lyra falls into step beside her, and the Citadel opens up ahead of them. The corridors and the halls and the map rooms and the war rooms and the formal audience chambers and all the long, difficult, necessary work of a kingdom that is only just beginning to become what it was always supposed to be. And she walks into all of it with the same steady pace she walked into the Great Hall 5 nights ago. No tremble, no hesitation. Behind her, from the direction of the small courtyard, she hears Kael begin to follow. She does not look back. She doesn't need to. She knows he is there. 3 months later, the letter from Kael arrives on a Tuesday. It is longer than she expected. 4 pages, small handwriting, the handwriting of a 15-year-old who has been waiting 3 months to say a great many things and has finally been given the address to say them to. He tells her about the river town. He tells her about the work he has found, helping one of the boat builders in the settlement, which he did not plan to love and loves unreasonably. He tells her about the mountains visible from the settlement on clear days, the ones he used to name from the eastern fields, which he can still see from here. He says they look different from the river towns. He says they look closer. Near the end, in the careful handwriting of someone who is not yet sure how to hold the thing he is trying to say. "I got a message from the Alpha King 3 months ago, before you sent your letter. He told me you were well and formidable and that the road would be open. I didn't know what to do with it for a week. Then I thought about the way you used to cross the river bend, the fast part, with the flat rocks, and how you always went first, how you always just stepped. I think I understand now why you didn't explain. Some things you have to step into yourself. I'm glad the next rock was there. Write again soon. Kael." She reads the letter twice. She folds it. She carries it down the corridor to the private study and she sets it on the desk and she stands for a moment with her hand flat on the paper and the evening light in the window and the Citadel settled and breathing around her. The door opens. Kael comes in. He looks at the letter. He looks at her face. He does not ask. He crosses the room and stands beside her and looks at the folded letter on the desk. And the looking is enough. The presence of him, the warmth of him, the simple and complete fact of him beside her. "He used to name the mountains," she says, "from the eastern fields, when he was small." "I know," he says quietly. "He can still see them from the river towns." "I know." He says they look closer. Kael puts his arm around her shoulders. Not dramatically, not as a statement. With the simple, practiced ease of a man who has been doing this for 3 months and has become accustomed to the specific geography of her beside him. The height and the warmth and the particular way she leans slightly into him without seeming to notice she is doing it, which she has decided she will continue not noticing for the foreseeable future. She looks at the letter. She thinks about the flat rocks in the river bend. She thinks about stepping. Outside the window, the Ironmoor mountain range holds its position against the evening sky, the high peaks and the dark valleys and the 7 territories laid out in the growing dark, and somewhere in it the lower settlements are lighting their evening fires and the black pine forest is doing its patient, ancient business of simply being older than everything, and in the East Wing bakery someone is beginning the quiet preparations for tomorrow morning's bread. "The envoy from the High Matriarch," she says. "The response we sent. Do you think she'll accept the terms?" "No," he says. "Good," she says. "I was getting bored." He makes a sound that is somewhere between a laugh and a sigh and is entirely, completely, without any management whatsoever, and he presses his lips to the top of her head. She picks up Kael's letter. She puts it in her boot. Old habit. She turns toward the door, toward the corridors and the negotiations and the long, difficult, necessary work of the war that is still coming. And Kael falls into step beside her and the Citadel opens ahead of them, and she walks into it the way she has always walked into things. like she is going somewhere she chose, like she always was.